Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Narycast, the St. Philip Narycast for short. I'm your host, Josh, and I first of all want to take this time to thank you guys. It's kind of we're in this growth mode right now. Of we were shooting for 500 subscribers, and I was mentioning last week we're almost there, but now we're like almost to 700. So I don't know what happened overnight. I think the Holy Spirit's moving in some of these videos, and so I'm glad you guys are supporting. Continue to hit the like button, engage, because when you get involved and you like engage with the channel, it spreads it out to people that you might also like this, and it may put it on other people's radar, which in my opinion, it's kind of like a social media way of spreading the gospel online. So YouTube needs more Jesus. That's our motto here. So continue to engage and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. But I'm super excited because I'm a big That Man Is You fan. So I first heard about this guy from That Man Is You, but I'm going to go ahead and turn over to John. And John, feel free to just, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is John Edwards. I'm the host of the Just a Guy on the Pew podcast. I'm the founder of Pew Ministries, which is a Catholic apostolate. Our mission is to bring the person of Jesus Christ to the person in the pew. We do that by going to parishes all over the country and starting men's groups. We give them a structure we call the Four Pillars, where they have 4 different nights that they meet. And we started 30 of those groups around the country now and outside of the country. We've been in Canada and some other places too, but that's the main work of our ministry. We really take John 15 seriously when Jesus says, I've appointed you to bear fruit and fruit that lasts. And that's what we really focus on in the church is how do we build fruit that lasts, not programs and things like that. I mean, programs have their place, but how do we equip men to lead other men? How do we teach people to lead? I mean, we can make DVD sets and all those things all day, and we've been part of those things, and that's great. I've been on That Man Is You. It's a wonderful ministry. There's a lot of things out there like that, but how do we actually teach people to fish? That's what Jesus did. Like he taught people how to become disciples so they could teach other people. And so that's the real purpose of our ministry is to bring men back to the faith so they could take their rightful place as the spiritual leaders of their family, the church, and of the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And this podcast being named after St. Philip Neri was really big on all that too. Of like, I love his quote of like, give me 10 detached men and watch us change the world. And I just loved his very focus on like the little way of evangelization, but specifically with the men. It's like, if we can get the men like practicing their faith and in love with God and seeking after trying to be a godlike man, the family will fall in suit. The wife will follow in suit, and then the children will be raised right. And that's awesome to hear what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge thing. I mean, if you look at it, there's polls out there that say when the husband's leading the family spiritually, 93% of families say Catholic. And when it's just left to the mother, and I don't mean just like in a derogatory way, but when it's the mother trying to do all of that, with everything else she's doing, or the grandmother or whoever's in the family, it drops to 17%. So we live in a world today where people are like, well, men are useless and they're toxic and we don't need them. But you can look at a poll like that and see that, you need them over 70%. There's a 70% difference when men are involved in not just involved, but leading the faith life. And so, men, we search as much, I'm sure we'll talk about in my story, but we search for the things that we think will make us happy in the world, and continue to find that those come up empty until we start to give our hearts and our lives back to Christ. And that's where we find the true joy and the fulfillment that we're looking for in our families and in our jobs and our lives and every aspect of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I became Catholic 5 years ago, so it's still like kind of new to it. I almost have to remind myself of that sometimes when I'm ever like feeling down or feel like someone's so much ahead of me in a knowledge standpoint, or like I just don't feel like my prayer life's as good as people. I kind of have to remind myself I'm still a baby at it, and it's a continuous growing process. But
and don't compare. Don't compare. That's an important point. Don't compare.
Yeah.
There's a reason the word sin is in comparison, man.
I know, right?
The devil will take you down a road you do not want to go down if you start doing that. So you are who God wants you to be, man.
Yeah. And I feel like he knows too, like, you're comparing yourself to that person, but you don't even know the struggles they may be having, or like they may be looking at you comparing themselves, and like you guys are just like not doing what you're supposed to. But my wife would like agree, like she told me kind of a little bit of those stats, maybe not as detailed, about like how important it is for like the man to be practicing his faith. And it's so funny because when we start having kids, she would be the one that would hold the baby, and if they kind of got rowdy, she would go in the back, because she's like, as we have more kids, I just feel like it's going to be more important for them to like see you like participating in mass and like on your knees and praying and being very like honed in and focused, and I'll help rile them up. And obviously it's a
Yeah.
team effort, but she took it even that far to be like, I want to make sure you can focus and be the role model. And now starting to have, like, our daughter's 4, and so she's kind of getting to that age where she's starting to understand what's going on. But yeah, it's always been a
Yeah.
focus for us too. Like,
It's
it needs
well,
to
and
be
it's got
led.
to be like
Yeah,
I tell you what, I was told by a lot of men growing up, like, do as I say, not as I do, which is like
yeah,
the stupidest thing ever. Like
yeah,
it's like, you're my
hmm
hero. Like, you wear a cape in
yeah,
my eyes. Why would I do something? Like, I want to do
yeah,
everything you do, good, bad, and indifferent. And
yeah,
so I talk to men about that all the time. I'm like, well,
yeah,
if you don't want your kids to, like, drink immediately when they can drink, then
hmm
don't sit there and drink around them all the time.
yeah,
Like, if you don't want, there's just so many things that we think, well, why did they wind up like that? And a lot of times the
hmm
hard part is pointing the finger back at ourselves and saying, well, what example
yeah,
did we set? Were we
yeah,
there? Were we attentive? Were we loving? Were we,
hmm
do we put their interests above our own? There's a lot of things that you could talk about there. And men we're so easily swayed to get off in the things of the world, right? Like, I need to
yeah,
work, I need to this, I got to
hmm
provide. And those are all good things, but
hmm
we have to remember what our primary role is if we're married and a father is to our
yeah.
wives and our kids and to support them in the things that are important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a business for a little bit. I owned a little nutrition club. We did, like, protein shakes, energy teas. I've kind of come from the fitness world, and it for so long I was just like, I got to make this work, got to be successful, and we were relatively, but like income wise, I was still comparing myself and still trying to get up there to where, like, I could also travel and I could go to these events that cost money, and it wasn't until later on where I actually got asked to interview for this job I have now. And I was like, oh, what the heck? I could add some extra income, not knowing that I'm, like, tacking on to this. Now I have this business and a full time job. And it's just like my vocation just slid down my priority list without me. It
Sure.
wasn't even an active decision. It was just like, it was forced. It was just pushed down. I was just taking things and putting it up here. And that vocation just dropped. And real fast, I found, like, my, like, relationship with my wife, we're getting, like, kind of getting bickering all the time and getting in all these arguments. And she wasn't really, I felt like she wasn't supporting the business, and I was getting frustrated at that. But it was just like, I just feel like work and the business have just taken my husband away. And I was like, man, my vocation has slipped. It has slipped. It is not the priority right now in my life.
Yeah.
We got to change
Happens to a
something.
lot of
So
folks, man. It
yeah,
happens to a lot of folks quickly.
yeah,
It's very hard to start good habits. It's very easy to get out of them.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
well, awesome. Well, I'm glad to have you on, and we were talking about a little bit before the show. I'm so glad this all worked out. The timing, actually moving it back a week, because I ended up having a focus missionary on last week that talked about the power of testimony, and we really talked more of the detail. Which, she's got a great testimony. We talked about the detail, though, of, like, how to share your testimony and why it's important to share your testimony. And I was like, this is perfect, because then we can get into John's testimony. And then next week we have Amber Rose, the religious hippie on social media. And
Yeah.
she's also got some great testimonies of working with people as well. And so I just thought, like, this just is going to wrap up well. But I thought we'd just dive in, like, just dive into your story and let you share as little or as much as you want. And I know we dove into it. If any of you guys attended That Man Is You, you've heard this before. And then, yeah, then I may have, like, questions and stuff throughout. And so I may just stop you, interrupt you in between. So
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's fine. No. So I was born and raised here in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm still here. Lived here. I'm 45. So I've been here my whole life. Born and raised, here. And I had 2 sisters, one older, one younger. My parents were from a small town in Mississippi, right about 30 minutes south of Oxford, where Ole Miss University is. And
Mhm.
they moved up here because Memphis was one of the, closest big cities for job opportunities and things. So
Mhm.
I was born in Midtown Memphis, was born and raised Baptist. Both my parents were Baptist. They dated from the 7th grade on, and
Mhm.
small town love kind of thing, and moved
Mhm.
up here. And, I attended an Episcopal school
Mhm.
when I was young. So it was a nice school in the neighborhood. Some of the public schools that were around the area we lived in were not the nicest and
Mhm.
safest. So my parents worked hard to send us to this Episcopal school where we'd have a good education and be
Mhm.
safe. But I spent most of my time at the Baptist church. Every time the
Mhm.
doors were open, I was there. I
Right.
loved evangelization from a young age. Man, I was,
Mhm.
8 years old and helping people decide whether they wanted to be baptized or not. I
Mhm.
was always at vacation Bible schools, church
Yeah.
camps, summer camps as I got older for youth and young adults. I mean, I love the Lord. I had a great youth minister who's now the pastor of that church, and we still continue to have lunch regularly and talk
Nice.
about faith and all those
Mm-hmm.
things, even though I'm Catholic now. And just had a great relationship with him, but thought I wanted to be a youth minister. And as I got into high school, I played basketball. I'm 6'8". I, had some other opportunities to do things in my life. And I got to the point where, Memphis is sort of this melting pot for SEC schools. So basically any of the big SEC schools you can be in, like you can drive, except for like Gainesville in Florida, you can be at in maybe 6 hours. So Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, any of them. So a lot of people's parents lived in Memphis, and they moved here after they got out of college, and then kids wanted to go where their parents went, right? They grew up watching their dad love Ole Miss football. They want to go to Ole Miss or whatever.
Yeah.
So my dad went to night school. So, and my mother went to the Mississippi College for Women. So there wasn't an option, for me to go there.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have an alma mater. I liked the University of Memphis. I grew up watching basketball games with Penny Hardaway and some of those guys so my dad took me to those all the time. So I thought, well, what the heck? I'll enroll in the University of Memphis. Now, my dad had looked at me when I was 16 and said, get off the couch and get a job. So he got me a job at Napa. I worked in the back of the warehouse loading trucks in the summertime and on Christmas break. So I'd had a job. In college, I decided to go, full time when I wasn't in school, working there just to make money to survive. And I got on the campus, man, and my first, Memphis is a commuter school. So there wasn't like a lot of dorm rooms and all that stuff at the time. People affectionately call it Tiger High. Just because it's like, a lot of people from town go there and they're driving from their houses, things like that. So, but I was on the campus and, man, for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by thousands of people. And as I said, all my friends had just decided to go where their parents went. So all of a sudden my youth group was gone. Like my support, my community, everybody I'd grown up with from the time I was in diapers was gone. I was never real popular at my Episcopal school or even in high school. So like, I didn't have a bunch of friends in that arena, just really at church. And so, they left, and for the first time in my life, I was really, really lonely. And so I go to this campus and I'm going there. I'm going to school, work. I'm surrounded by thousands of people. I don't know any of them. And it was very, very lonely. Did pretty well first semester, was making good grades. And, but I was trying to talk to girls in class and I wasn't getting very far. And, one day, this girl, this beautiful girl, she was one of the dancers, the pom dancers for the school. I kept trying to talk to her, wasn't having much luck. And then one day this guy walks in the room and he's got on, he starts talking to her and she's just chatting him up. And I thought, what gives? This guy's like 5'2". He's not that good looking, here I'm 6'8". I don't know that I'd be called handsome in a lot of circles, but I'm okay. And he, I was like, why is she talking to him so much? And I looked at his shirt and he had on Greek letters on his shirt. I thought, oh, maybe I ought to get me one of those shirts. So I knew one person still in Memphis. He was a guy that was he'd gone to my church. He was 3 years older than me. He actually went to the high school. I transitioned from the Episcopal school to a public high school. It was a really good high school when it was time for that. Well, he was always really cool to me at church. He was always kind of letting me hang out with him and the older kids. And then when I got to my high school, he was in 12th. I was in 9th. He let me run around with the seniors, and I made friends pretty quickly and easily. And so he'd always kind of looked out for me. And I thought, well, okay, well, I'll call. His name was Christian. I said, I'll call Christian and see, I know he's going to Memphis, see what he's up to. So I called him. He said, John, I'm actually a rush chairman for the Sigma Chi chapter here in Memphis. And yeah, like, dude, you should come out. We're about to start rushing for the semester. And, you come out, we're going to be at this bar on the Highland Strip, which was a, strip of bars right there by the school. Yeah. He said, come meet us. If we like you and you like us, and maybe we can, figure out if this is the right place for you. And then, if you get in, you'll make friends and, it'll change your experience. Well, I never really drank that much in high school. I, a little bit, but not much. Never really had any exposure to a lot of drugs or anything. I was always athletic and played sports, stuff like that. So I go, they like me, I like them. Next thing you know, I get a bid and I rush through. And the day I got in that fraternity was the last day I went to church for 11 years of my life. Wow. I had father wounds. My dad was one of 6 kids, raised on a farm. His parents didn't find this out till later in life, but his parents were not loving. They didn't love each other at all. They fought all the time. They basically had kids for farm hands. And my dad was the youngest, so all of his brothers and sisters had moved off and had families. And he was kind of left with all of that. And
Yeah.
so he didn't get a lot of I love yous and I'm proud of yous and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And I didn't either, because you can't give what you don't have, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was always looking my entire life growing up to impress my father. I played basketball because my dad was
Mhm.
an amazing basketball player that could have played in the NBA if he hadn't been drafted in the Army when he was fixing to
Mhm.
go to Ole Miss. And
Yeah.
so, he never got to live that dream out. And so my dad, he worked a lot. He wasn't around. He wasn't around all the time. He worked a lot to
Mhm.
provide a way of life for us. And but it was hard because when he was around, I wanted his approval. I wanted his love. I
Mhm.
wanted those things. And it's just, he was one of those type guys. It's like, you have clothes on your back, you have food on your table, you have a place to
Mhm.
sleep. How does that not show you I love you? Like, all that says I love you.
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't realize I had father wounds and that I'd been searching for affirmation my whole life. So when I got in the
Mhm.
fraternity, all of a sudden I had a community again. And I was just
Mhm.
looking for, okay, how do I get people to like me? How do I matter? How do I, look
Mhm.
cool? How do I run
Yeah.
around with the cool folks? And pretty quickly I saw that the ones that everybody seemed to think were cool, the ones that pretty girls were running around with and all that stuff, were the guys that drank a lot, did drugs, all those
Mhm.
things. Well, I had been working at that job at Napa since I was 16. I moved up when I got in college. I was managing the warehouse now. I was making about $40,000 a year, which was like being rich in college.
Yeah.
So, I
Mhm.
just had a car note, and the fraternity house was like $100 a month to live in or
Mhm.
something. So, but I had money, and so when I started, trying to be friends with these guys, like, well, I can, you don't have any money, I can pay to get you in that club, or I've got a
Mhm.
car and I've got gas, or you want to go somewhere and eat, or oh, you don't have any money for beer, I'll buy beer. And
Mhm.
so pretty soon, I had friends, but it wasn't for the right reasons. And I
Yeah.
started to look at what else they did too, and they were, like I said, binge drinking and doing drugs. So before long, I was smoking a lot of weed, and before long after that, I'd basically tried every pill, in
Mhm.
people's medicine cabinets: Xanax, Valium,
Mhm.
Percocet. I mean, anything that anybody had to take one of these and you'll feel better. You'll feel
Mhm.
awesome at the party tonight, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Binge drinking, just walked away from the faith. And my
Mhm.
whole life was about, finding girls to take to bed, drinking and doing
Mhm.
whatever anybody thought I was cool.
Yeah.
Before long, I was over at one of their houses on a Sunday. One of the guys in the fraternity, they had their own house off of campus, and we were over there drinking and cooking out, watching NFL football on a Sunday afternoon. And been
Mhm.
over there since 11 or 12 in the morning. Been out the night before with all of them, and 3 4
Mhm.
hours of sleep, and starting it back up again the next day.
Yeah.
And we're watching football, and about 5 or 6 o'clock, I realized, man, I'm kind of drunk. Like,
Mhm.
and I've got to drive back across town. Memphis was never, known for taxis, and there wasn't cool like bird scooters or Ubers or Lyft or any of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I got up looking for people. I was in the den by myself. I guess I'd kind of gotten high and just zoned out,
Mhm.
and went out on the back patio, looked for them where we'd been grilling out. Nobody was out there. Looked at the front porch. Nobody was out there. And so I started to walk back to the house, and
Mhm.
nobody in these other rooms. And finally, I, heard some voices come out of a room with a cracked door.
Mhm.
And when I looked in there, I started to open the door. The guys were all standing over this dresser, and there were lines of cocaine
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh man, I'd never seen coke. Like, I'd taken acid, I'd done ecstasy,
Mhm.
I'd done stuff like that, but cocaine for some reason was always the one you saw like on the after school specials. Like, you're never going
Yeah.
to come back from that. And
Yeah, that was the line.
yeah. So
Mhm.
I immediately went to shut the door, and one of the guys came out and was just like, hey man, like, we've been doing this around you the whole time since we've been friends with you, but we didn't
Mhm.
really, know if we could trust you or not. And,
Mhm.
but hey man, like, you've seen it now. So if you want to keep hanging out, you're going to want to take one of these. And by the way, I mean, I heard you say
Mhm.
you were, as you were looking through the house, hey man, could anybody take me home? This will
Mhm.
wake you up, man. It's like, drinking like 4 cups of coffee. Well, I
Mhm.
never drank coffee. I had a sip of my dad's black coffee when I was 4 years
Yeah.
old, spit it out, decided I
Oh
never
yeah.
wanted it again.
Yeah.
So I've saved thousands of dollars on not buying
Yeah.
Starbucks and everything else. My
Yep.
wife is my wife has picked that up. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
she's spending the money on the Starbucks, but
Yeah.
just never
Mhm.
had that vice or whatever, that liking to coffee. So
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
wouldn't even call it a vice, but this is that affinity for
Mhm.
coffee. But
Yeah.
um, so man, I felt the pressure, and I don't want to blame anybody else. I was a grown man. I made my own decisions, but I gave in. I didn't want to lose the friends I had. I didn't want to be
Mhm.
kicked out of the group and all that stuff. And so I went back
Mhm.
and took a line of cocaine. Well, immediately I felt like I could run through a wall. Like I
Mm-hmm.
never felt like anything like that in my life. I mean, it burned, of
Yeah.
course, like physically, but then I went back in the den and I just sat there, and it was like my heart was beating out of my chest. I was paranoid and looking around every way and just
Yeah.
wigging out, sort of like, man, when's this going to stop? When's this going to stop? Like I want to do, I just can't believe I did this. When am I going to get to go home?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, after a couple of hours, it started to subside, and I had sobered up, and I got in my car and drove home, said, I'll never do that again. Like that was dumb.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never do that again. I
Yeah.
won't leave the friends. I'll just won't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that next Friday night, they called me and said, hey man, we're all over at, this other guy's house, different house, same people. And he said, come over and we'll drink a little bit. Then we'll get in the car and we'll go down to Beale Street, which is like Memphis's
Mm-hmm.
Bourbon Street. It's where
Yeah.
rock and roll was born and Elvis
Mm-hmm.
Presley and all that stuff. And there's bars everywhere right outside the FedEx Forum where the Grizzlies play. And so
Mm-hmm.
I go over there, we start drinking. As soon as I knock on the door and the door opens up, like this time it's not hidden. There's cocaine all over the coffee table and
Mm-hmm.
guys were just doing it. And I thought right then I should turn around and leave. Like, man, you
Mm-hmm.
need to get out of here. And next thing you know, I just, peer pressure again. Like and not even there for them, just my own pressure of, I
Yeah.
want friends. I want community. I don't want to lose what I have. I don't want to start over. And
Yeah.
these guys aren't bad guys. That kind of, everybody's doing this kind of stuff. It's college, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I sat down and man, we did drugs for several hours, went downtown, stayed out all night, came back at like 2 a.m, 3 a.m, did more drugs, was up till 7 or
Mm-hmm.
8 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And went home, went to bed, slept till 4, and back at it again the next night. And I started
Yeah.
to do what my buddy Dr. Bob Schutz calls, which is making unholy vows. I
Mm-hmm.
started saying like, I'll never buy it. I'll never have the guy's number. I'll never
Yeah.
do it on a
Yeah.
weeknight. I'll never do it myself.
Yeah.
Well, very quickly, all those things fell. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's all we were doing. We would go under the context or the pretext of we're going to go over here and hang out, and then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
go meet girls. And it just
Yeah.
started to get to the point where we never even left. We just sat there and did drugs all night. And so the
Yeah.
group started to people started moving away because they were like, okay, this is getting out of hand. But a
Mm-hmm.
core of us just kept doing it. And
Yeah.
pretty soon I would go to work, I'd come home, I'd drink, and I'd do cocaine. I was buying it myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I moved up in my job at Napa Auto Parts at the time. I got out of the warehouse. I got in a training program, and then I became an outside salesman. So, man, my school, I started getting goose eggs.
Mm-hmm.
My father was like, John, I'm not going to continue to contribute to this. Like, just you work until you can figure it out. So I dropped out of
Yeah.
school, even though I was still hanging out in the fraternity, and
Mm-hmm.
started working full time. Well, not long after that, I was making over $200,000 a year, and I was 23, 24 years old. I was a
Yeah.
really good salesman, man. I was
Yeah.
really, really good at it. And
Mm-hmm.
so now I had a bunch of money. I had a drug habit, and none of those things were going well. From the outside looking in, I was a guy who had everything. I had,
Mm-hmm.
cars. I had, a nice place to live. I had, girls, all this stuff. And, from what the world would tell you successful, but man, I was a broken mess inside. I was a
Yeah.
chameleon among men.
Mm-hmm.
I could be anything to anybody. When I was at work, I could walk into a guy's, shop I'd never been in, see golf stuff
Mm-hmm.
on the wall and talk about golf all day long. And next thing you know, the guy's buying everything he's, all his parts and all that stuff from me, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so I could be anything to anybody. Nobody expected anything from 8 to 5. I was Johnny on the spot. And then from 5 to 8 in the morning, I was doing drugs and drinking. And man, it was the loneliest time I ever found it in my life. I started moving away from the fraternity. I was aging out, right? I didn't want to be
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
old guy at the parties.
Yeah.
Like, this guy's 30. What's he doing here? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, and I didn't have any women in my life. I was just
Mm-hmm.
hanging out with those guys and doing drugs. And so I
Mm-hmm.
found myself starting an addiction to pornography because
Mm-hmm.
the drugs gave you urges. There was,
Yeah.
I had nobody in my life. And so I wound up starting to watch pornography every night after I get home from drinking and doing drugs. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was another addiction I had in my life. And I was just disgusted with myself. I was ashamed. I didn't, it was a very vicious cycle,
Mm-hmm.
successful on the outside, but broken on the inside. So,
Yeah.
not long after that, I'd been praying. I'll say praying, and what I mean by that is like, hey, Jesus, I need something. So that was my relationship with it at the time. Hey, I'm lonely. Send me a girl. Hey, I'm tired
Yeah.
of doing this. Help me stop. But no effort of my own, and not really
Yeah.
even believing that it would happen. Didn't even
Yeah.
really know how to pray anymore. But I started praying, hey, I'm lonely. I want a girl in my life. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to stop all this stuff. And so one night I was out with my parents and we were at a Outback Steakhouse or something. And this girl that I'd known in college, she actually dated one of my friends, one of my best friends, and one of the guys I used to do the drugs with. I saw her. I hadn't seen her in 4 or 5 years, and she was hostessing, and I said hi to her. She didn't speak to me. She looked at me like, "Dude, who are you, and why are you talking to me?" Now I'd filled out and looked different. Probably had some terrible goatee or something, and she didn't recognize me, and it bothered me all dinner. I was like, "Why didn't she say hi?" I don't ever remember being ugly. I don't ever remember being like rude or mean. I mean, I never even really talked to her that much, when she was around.
Yeah.
So another week goes by. I see her somewhere else. I speak to her again. She completely looks at me like, "Who are you and why are you speaking to me?" And so at this point, I'm like, what the heck is the matter? Well, finally, one Friday night, I was out with my buddies at this sports bar we went to on Friday night a lot. And we were, getting there about 6 o'clock. My little sister was in town. She'd moved away to play volleyball and at a Baptist college in East Tennessee. And she rarely came home. But when she did, she wanted to hang out with me and wanted to see my buddies she knew and stuff like that. So we're in this bar and we're all sitting there playing Golden Tee. And, we're in the bathroom, taking lines and doing stuff like that. And for some reason, all my buddies that night, like at 7 o'clock, were like, "Hey, we're going to go. We're not, we're just going to go home tonight." So a lot of guys left, and there was like me and 2 other guys and my sister, and then she left pretty quickly. Well, shortly after that, this girl walks in, the one I'd been seeing, and she speaks to my buddies, everybody that's still in there that she knows, and she looks at me and just walks off. I was like, "Well, what gives, man? Like, I don't understand." She even spoke to her ex-boyfriend who she hated. Like, what did I do,
Yeah.
And so my little sister is left. This Angela walks in, goes and sits at this table with some people I know. And this one girl gets up and comes over who actually knew my little sister and said, "Hey, John, this girl over here thinks you're cute. She wants to talk to you." And I was like, "Who? Where? Because that hadn't happened in forever." So I'm like a male deer in mating season. I'm looking up, my neck swelling up. I'm looking around like, what's going on? And so long story short, she goes, I said, "Who?" And she pointed to her. And I said, "Well, that's Angela." And she goes, "Yeah." And I said, "I've seen her like 3 times lately." And she had no interest in me at all. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
She goes back over there. She goes, "I don't think she knows who you are." And she goes back over there and tells her, and Angela's eyes get real wide. And then she comes back over and she's like, she still wants to talk to you. So I get up and I walk over there, and me and all my suave gameness, I walk over and I go, "What do you want?" And she goes, "Hi." And I said, "Hey, Angela, what do you want?" And she goes, "I wanted to talk to you. What's the matter?" I said, "I've seen you 3 times lately and you haven't spoken to me once. Like, it's actually been quite rude. Like, what do you need? Yeah. And she's like, "I didn't recognize you. I had no idea who you were. Like, I don't even remember you speaking to me. I was at work." And so I sat down and I was like, "Well, what's up? What are you looking for? And, what do you want?" And she's like, "I just wanted to talk to you." So we start talking, and you know how it is with guys and friends, ex-girlfriends. Like, it's, buddies before girls stuff.
Yeah.
So I wasn't even thinking about like anything romantic. I just was like, okay, how do I get this conversation over with so I can go back and sit with my buddies, which is odd because all I'd done was ask for God to put a girl in my life. And now I was like trying to get rid of one. Yeah. So we're sitting there, and next thing you know, I'm having a great time. And my 2 buddies that were left came over, and they were like, "Hey, man, we're going to go to another bar." I said, "All right, well, let me get my tab and I'll go with you." And they're like, "No, man, you need to stay." I said, why would I stay? Like, I have, I'm like leaning over, like, I have the drugs, like, you're going to want those, like, and they're like, "You need to stay." Well, finally, one of them goes, "You need to stay." And he starts nodding his head to Angela. And I went, "What's wrong with your neck?" Right. Like so dense, and so anyway, I look over and Angela's got these like, big brown doe eyes looking at me. And I was like, "Oh, you want me to stay?" And she goes, "Yeah." And it hit me. And I went, oh man, she likes me. And then I started thinking my buddy's going to kill me, and all this stuff. And so we start talking, my buddies leave. We wound up going to meet them at that bar and hanging out. And I asked her out that night, and we went out the next night. And a year later we were married. Now, along the way, she was Catholic. She told me, she said, "The man I'm going to marry is going to be Catholic." And I thought I was the man for the job. So I went to the nearest RCIA class and signed right up, and chivalrously gave up my faith. I didn't practice anymore for hers. But I never took it serious, man. Like, I went to RCIA and I could answer all the questions. I was a good Baptist. I read the Bible 5 times before I was 15. I knew the scriptures. And so I could answer faith questions and all those things. And I wasn't too concerned about all the Mary stuff and all that, because I was doing this to marry her. I was like, if this is what it takes to marry her, then not, this is what I'll do.
Yeah.
But I never told her what was going on in my life the whole time. I kept doing drugs under her nose. I never did enough to where she could visibly see it, or I'd act weird or tweak or anything like that. So
Yeah.
she knew I drank. She drank too. We were still in that young single age, or, together, but, not
Yeah.
married age. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just thought, naturally when I got married, I'd stop. I was like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
is just, I'll grow up. When it's time to get married, I'll do it until then, and then I'll stop. I
Yeah.
was doing cocaine till 7 a.m. the night I got married, the night before I got
Mm-hmm.
married. I didn't stop. My wedding day was beautiful, but it could have been so much more if I hadn't been so selfish. And that's what I tell people is when you get addicted to things, like, we're all naturally selfish,
Yeah.
due to the
Yeah.
fall. But you
Mm-hmm.
throw addictions on top of that, and man, all you think about is what you want, how you want, when you need it, and how you're going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I expected that to change things. It didn't. I wound up doing that, and then shortly after that, my mother had breast cancer for a number of years. Had been in remission.
Yeah.
Everything seemed to be good, but she had some heart issues,
Mm-hmm.
and she realized she was really, really tired. The doctors didn't think it was the chemo.
Mm-hmm.
They'd known that the cancer come back, but the chemo was keeping it under control, and she
Mm-hmm.
had this experiencing of real exhaustion. And so they took her in for a checkup and found that she
Mm-hmm.
had 3 blockages in her heart. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, dangerous, you need to have heart surgery or you might have a heart attack and die at any moment.
Yeah.
So she had a choice to make: either stop the chemo and have the heart surgery, or not have the heart surgery and possibly have a heart attack. Well, her and my father chose the heart surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the days I was working, my sisters always took care of my mother's doctor's appointments. They knew everything. They kept me informed. I was selfish. I was busy. I was too this or that, running
Yeah.
off from holidays quickly, all that stuff as an addict. But I remembered my mother had a cancer appointment in Memphis. They had moved back to where they had grown up in Mississippi and built a retirement home, but they kept all their doctors up here. They were trying to sell their house in Memphis, and so they kept things here while they were in transition. So she was up here for a cancer doctor's appointment, and I just remembered it out of the blue one day, and I said, well, I'll just stop in there and see if they're there. So I drive over there, and sure enough, the lady said, yeah, they're in the back, go in. And so I go in, and my mom's like, John, like, I can't believe you're here. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. What a great surprise. And my dad was his usual, like, unemotional self, son, kind of whatever.
Yeah.
And so I go in, and the doctor comes in, and she says, oh, you must be John. I've heard a lot about you. And again, my sisters did all that. So she goes, I'm sorry that I'm glad to meet you finally, but I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. And she turns and she looks at my mother, and she said, Miss Edwards, I'm sorry to say this, but we knew, like, if you stopped the chemo to have the heart surgery, there was a possibility the cancer could not only come back, but spread. And she said, and I'm sorry, I regret to tell you that it's moved from your breast into your lymph nodes, into your lungs, and into your brain. And there's nothing more we can do. She said, you've got 2 weeks to 2 months to live.
Wow.
Yeah, man, it's, I've told this story 1,000 times. It still hurts to tell it. It's, I just in a moment realized how much time I'd spent on myself and spent away from her, and too busy, and had to get back to my drinking and drugs, and all the weight of that guilt hit me. I looked over, my mom just kind of said, okay, doctor, thank you for all you've done. And my dad just immediately started crying, which I'd never seen in my life. Like, and then immediately he did the whole, like, what am I doing? I'm a man thing, and wiping his, and then he started getting angry, my mother just kind of looked at us and said, okay, well, let's go back to the house in Midtown, and we'll get clothes, and John, you can follow us over there, and then we'll say goodbye. We're going to go to the farm, and we'll figure things out from here. And so I followed them over to the house I grew up in Midtown, and I'm walking up this driveway and just remembering all the memories of all the years I was there and all those things. And my dad gets out of the car and goes in the house to get clothes for him and my mother to take down there for the weekend to the house they just built. And I walked over to the door of my mom's car, the passenger side where she was, and I opened the door, and I just fell into her lap, all 5 or 6, 8 of me into all five of her probably. And she was sitting there just rubbing my head. I had hair at the time. That's why I tell people, oh, I'm bald now. She rubbed all the hair off. But she was just rubbing my head and saying, John, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And I was like, I don't want to hear that, Mom. I don't want to hear that. Like, no, it's not going to be okay. I mean, we just had Jacob, and he's barely a year old, and you're not even going to be here. Like, you're not even going to be here, and he's not going to know how amazing you are. And what if we have other kids? And the crazy thing was, like, it was her moment of deep despair and sadness. And yet I was, what about me? What about me? What about me?
Mm-hmm.
What about me? I was so
Yeah.
selfish. Now, Jacob, that was another moment when he was born, right? I was like, Angela came to me not long after we were married and said, I'm pregnant. And I was like, awesome. I'm going to be the best dad in the world. I'm going to be the dad my dad wasn't to me. I'm going to be around. I'm going to be present. This kid's going to be so sick of me, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't what happened. You know, I had transitioned into my job at work. I was like 100% commission salesman. People were texting me and calling me all hours of the day and night. And so I had to keep this living going. And so I was always busy. And then when I wasn't busy, I was drinking and doing drugs under the table. And so, you know, I was a good dad when I wanted to be, but it wasn't very often. So in the midst of all this, you know, I'm laying there in my mother's lap and just like, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this. I need you. This isn't fair. And she's just saying, John, I know Jesus and I've always loved God and I'm going to be in heaven. I'm going to see my mom and dad and everything's going to be all right. And I was like, I don't want to hear that about God and all this stuff. And so my dad starts walking back outside and I didn't want any piece of him. So I like got up out of the car and I said, what am I supposed to do? Like, what do I do now? And she said, well, John, could you tell your sisters, which was the hardest thing I ever had to do, tell them their mother was going to die. And she said, and just, we're going to go to the farm. We'll be in touch. And just, I love you, son. And she shut the door and, you know, they drove off and I walked right up to the porch and I just kicked it as hard as I could. And I looked up at the sky and I said, God, I hate you. Like, I hate you. If this is the type God you are, like, I don't want any part of you. Like, if you're going to take a woman who has served you so impeccably, who has loved you so well her entire life and leave a scumbag, lying drug addict like me, a loser here, then I don't want any part of you. I hate you and I will never worship you again. And I started cussing him and everything else. And I meant every word of it. I was crying and screaming and just screaming this anger at him. And so I got in my vehicle. I drove back to my house. My wife was there and she said, oh my gosh, what's going on? And I told her, I said, Angela, mom's got cancer. Mom's going to die. It could be tomorrow. It could be 2 weeks from now. And so we had a cry and you know, then I got angry again. I didn't need to cry. I was a man. I didn't have feelings or emotions. I didn't need anybody or anything. And so my mother died shortly after that. I was in the room with her. I mean, when people say that we don't have souls, they don't know what they're talking about because I watched my mother's leave her body. I literally turned to get a bottle of water from the dresser and turned back, heard my sister gasp, and I looked over. My mother had been looking at me when I turned, and when I looked back, her eyes were just empty and black, you know. But I was doing drugs that night too because I didn't know how to handle the stress of everything. So I was walking outside, smoking a cigarette, doing drugs, drinking a beer, going back inside, washing up, going to the room with my mom again. So even in that moment, I was so addicted that like I was doing those things. So my mom dies. I went off the rails after that, man. Like I started making a bunch of money. I had a new customer that had 5 shops in town that started buying from me. They were very demanding. They were texting me all the time. I was stressed out all the time in my life. And when I was stressed out, I just went to the drugs and the alcohol. Angela comes up to me not long after that and said, hey, I'm pregnant again, which surprised me because we weren't, you know, we were kind of like ships passing the night a lot at this point. She was spending a lot of her time with Jacob. I was when I wanted to, and I'd cook dinner or something. And then I was just on the couch doing the drugs and drinking. And she still had no idea. She thought I had the perfect cover. She thought I was angry and just didn't know how to grieve my mother's loss. And, you know, the only time I would ever grieve was in the morning. I'd get in the shower and like turn the speaker in the bathroom up as loud as it go and punch the wall and scream and get it out. Then I'd go be Johnny on the spot all day, smiling and selling people whatever they needed. So I was worried, just like I was with Jacob when she told me she was pregnant. I thought about, well, man, I was doing drugs during conception. Please don't let anything be wrong with them. Same thing with the girl. She comes to me and says, I'm pregnant. It turns out we're having identical twin girls. We were older. Angela was in her mid-30s, and she had a hereditary thing that her aunt had that was, you know, could cause her to throw blood clots. And so she was having to go to checkups every single week. They were giving her certain drugs to thin her blood. It was a very hard pregnancy. But I still was doing all the things that I was doing. And I was even more worried when she said she was pregnant because I was doing more than I'd ever had. And she was having twins. But I was a coward, man. Like I wanted to tell her the truth, but I just wouldn't do it. I was afraid she'd leave and take everything and I'd lose everything. And the house, the car, the money, the kids, her, probably in that order, my reputation, everything. So I didn't tell her. Luckily, Caitlin and Allison, my 11-year-old now twin girls, are identical girls, red hair, blue eyes, perfect kids. Jacob too, perfectly healthy. You know, and luckily by the grace of God that happened. But after that, things just went off the rails. I was basically non-existent as a husband and father. When I was very mean and derogatory to Angela, and just I was never physically abusive, but certainly verbally abusive.
Yeah.
I started staying up till 2 a.m. every night, and I would just turn on ESPN and drink beer, and just in case she came back up there. She was going to bed with the kids at 9 o'clock every night, and so I would just wait, and I'd start doing drugs, and I'd be up at 2 a.m. and then I'd stop doing drugs. I'd watch some porn. I'd go to bed because Angela and I weren't being intimate at all anymore. And one of those nights, I went back to bed, and I laid down. I went to sleep pretty quickly, which was not common. You do cocaine; it's very hard to go to sleep, especially the amount I was doing. But I fell asleep quickly, and about 5 minutes later, my heart started blowing out of my chest, and I sat up in the bed, and I thought, no, my heart's like doing this, and I'm going to have a heart attack. Oh my gosh, this is it. I finally overdosed. And so I roll out of the bed. I hit all fours. I crawled to our little bathroom. You would call it a master bathroom, but it was more like a closet at that time. But we walked, I rolled in there. I turned to look back after I'd hit the ground. It was a carpeted bedroom, so she didn't hear me somehow. And I crawl in the bathroom. I pull myself up on the commode, and I just start going, no. And I'm rubbing my arms and going, no. Like I'm gonna have a heart attack. I'm gonna die. And I started going like, I need to tell Angela to call for help. I need to tell her to call for an ambulance. But I was like, if you do that, then an ambulance is going to show up, and they're going to take your blood, and it's going to come back with the drugs, and she's going to know. She knows that something's been going on. She'd caught me once before, and I convinced her it was a friend of mine's, all this stuff. And I said, she's going to leave me, and she's going to take everything. I thought I'd rather die right here on this table on this floor than tell her the truth, because it's the easy way out. I can get out of it and not have to deal with the embarrassment and all that stuff. So I just grabbed the towel that was in front of me, and I put it up to my face. And I thought, well, if I'm going to die, at least I'll die quietly. Pretty quickly, my breathing started to slow, and I realized I was having a panic attack. So my breathing slowed down, my heart slowed down. I went and got back in bed, and I said, I'll never do that again. I'm done. I'm done with drugs. So I got up the next morning, I pulled them all out, poured out the beer, went to work. By 4:30 the next day, I was back buying the drugs again. And the same thing happened the next night, sitting there till 2 a.m, doing drugs, watching porn, going back to the bedroom, take a shower, get in the bed, fall asleep pretty quickly. Same thing happens again. Boom, 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 just out of my chest. I fall on the floor, same scene, crawl the bathroom. Angela doesn't wake up again. I'm sitting there on the commode, rocking back and forth, going, no. And it hit me. I go, man, I don't know that I'm going to get another strike. I've had 2 strikes.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm going to get another one. So I was like, all I want to do is tell somebody the truth of my life. And that's the worst part of an addiction. People say, is it the withdrawal? It's not. It's the lying. Never telling anybody the truth. And always, like, your life is a house of cards, and somebody could pull one card and it'll go sideways in just a minute. The whole thing will fall down.
Yeah.
So all I wanted to do was tell somebody the truth. And I remembered I'd been to confession one time in 11 years as a Catholic, and that was in RCIA. And I remember the priest could listen to what you had to say, but they couldn't tell anybody. So my father-in-law was uber Catholic. He'd been inviting me to men's conferences for years, and I'd gone in 2015 to one where Father Larry Richards spoke, and I was going to change my life. For about 3 hours after that conference, I went back to doing the drugs. Oddly enough, Father Larry Richards is the chaplain of my ministry now and a really great friend of my life.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I remembered that conference was coming up that weekend. I was sitting in the bathroom, just sitting there trying to calm down. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to that conference, but it's not for any other reason, just to tell a priest, like, the truth of my life, and he can't tell anybody, and then I'll feel better and won't feel as bad. So I go to the conference, I don't remember who was speaking. And then there was about 40 priests there to hear confessions. I walked down past all these doors. There was like 40 priests in these rooms, and I picked like door 38, and I walk in, and there's this heavy set, kind of angry looking old priest. I'd been walking by their doors. I was like, no, I know that priest. Nope, I know him. Nope, I know him. Nope, I know him. And finally I saw this name, and he was from out of town. I was just like, I don't know. I'll go in here. Yeah. So I went in. I had no idea how to go to confession because it had been 11 years. And I sit down, and this priest looks angry, and he's like, begin. I said, okay, begin. And he goes, what do you mean, begin? And I said, I'm waiting on you. And he's like, you don't know what you're doing? I go, no. And he's like, just angry. And he probably heard 40 confessions before mine. And here I come with all my idiocy. And so, he walks me through how to start. I do. And then I start sharing, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to tell this guy a little bit, and I'm going to get out of here. He seems mad and angry, and I'm just going to move on. And so next thing you know, I started pouring out everything. I was like that kid in the Goonies. It was like, one time when I was in third grade, I threw puke off the balcony and everybody started vomiting. I was telling them everything. And then, we got to all the recent stuff, with the drugs, the alcohol, the way I treated my wife and kids, the lying, all that stuff. And I just started breaking apart, man, crying, just everything pouring out of me. And I was just, he looked like he was getting hit with body blows. He's just like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know I was going to be all this. Yeah. So I tell him, and at the end, I said, I want to change my life, but I don't want to get in trouble. And he's like, what do you mean you don't want to get in trouble? This isn't up to you. You don't get to tell God how he delivers his mercy and grace. If you're not going to be serious, you're not getting absolution. I was like, no, I just stop yelling at me. I'm already crying. I can't cry any more than I already am. The first time I did this, Jesus was much nicer than you, So I finally, just calmed down and he gave me absolution. And I left out of there feeling the Holy Spirit in my life for the first time in a long time. So I go home on that Saturday, I throw out the drugs, pour out the booze, and I made it 4 days. Well, that following week was Holy Week. And I sold something. I put a quote in on a shop in Mississippi that was in my territory to add on to their automotive repair shop. And it was, they were going to need like $400,000 worth of equipment from me. And I was going to make more money on that sale than I'd made in a long time. He calls me on Holy Thursday. He's like, hey, we've been looking at all the other bids. John, you knew we were going to buy it from you from the first place. We always buy from you. Come down here, bring me an invoice. I'll sign it. So I'll leave in the middle of the day from where I was, take him an invoice down there. He signs it. I'm coming back up 55 into Memphis out of Mississippi, and it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. I thought, you know what? I want to celebrate. And for me, that meant doing drugs and drinking. And I thought, well, you promised Jesus you wouldn't do that anymore in confession. And I was like, well, just this once. So I called the dealer about 30 times. He won't answer. I'm supposed to be picking up my son Jacob on the other side of Memphis in a suburb where my father-in-law had him. And so I started heading out that way. I'm calling the dealer. He doesn't answer. And I get off on the exit to go get Jacob. And he calls back and he said, man, I was asleep. Come on back. I'll take care of you. So I turned the car around like the Duke boys, man, like the Dukes of Hazzard, just whipped the car around, get back down the interstate, wound up pulling in his house right across from Elvis Presley's Graceland. It's not in a nice part of town anymore. And I run in, get my normal $40 worth of Coke and get in my car. And I look down and my gas gauge is on zero, like literally digitally on zero. And I thought, man, I don't want to run out of gas here. So I got to the four-way stop, and then I knew there was a gas station down on the corner to the left. So I ran down there and I pulled up, and all of a sudden I went, oh, good, I made it. Well, as soon as I put the car in park, I heard whoop, whoop. And I looked behind me, and the DEA was behind me. They'd been watching his house. And so next thing you know, they grab me, they throw me out of the car, throw me up against the car, handcuff me, start yelling, where's the drugs? I'm in my full Napa uniform in the middle of a bad part of town. People are watching everywhere, and all these cop cars are just flooding in. And they find the drugs in my sock, and then they throw me in the back of a Tahoe, and I hit both sides of that truck all the way down there, sliding back and forth, driving 9-0 downtown. And they take me into the organized crime unit. They shake me down in there, chain me to a bench. I'm sitting there for about 3 hours. And whole time I'm worried about Angela and thinking I never showed up to pick up Jacob. She's going to think I'm dead, or like she's not going to know what happened to me.
Yeah.
And so I wind up pretty quickly. They come in with a uniformed police officer, and he says, I'm taking you downtown to jail, And I said, well, wait a minute. Like they said that, if I helped, which, I didn't give them really information, but if I was, somewhat helpful, they'd let me go. Well, they lied about that. They put me in a police car. So they're taking me down to the one of the worst jails in the United States in Memphis. And there's this long line of cars there. And they're all waiting to drop, people off that have committed crimes. And so I'm sitting in the back of this car, and these two police officers are arguing with each other because they're about to get off work and they're mad. Now they got to wait in this line. It's going to be a couple of hours or whatever. So one of them looks in the rearview mirror and he says, man, you don't look like you've ever been in trouble in your life. What's your deal? And I said, I never have. I got addicted to something in college, man. I made stupid mistakes. All I want to do is call my wife and tell her where I am and tell her I'm sorry. Well, next thing you know, he says, well, your phone's in the trunk. Right. Like we're not going anywhere because of you. I can get the phone and put it to your ear and you can call her. But I can't uncuff you. And I said, well, I don't know what I'd say to her. And he looked at me in the rearview mirror and he said, was this about her? Or is it about you? And my whole life had been about me. Yeah. So he grabbed the phone. She answered the phone and I said, she goes, hello, John, where are you? Oh my gosh, where are you? Are you okay? And I said, Angela, I was arrested for the possession of cocaine. I'm in the back of a police car headed into the jail in downtown Memphis. And she said, I hate you. And she hung up the phone. She knew something had been wrong. She knew it was more than my mother dying. And she finally had her answer. I felt horrible about it, but it's like I had to turn my attention on to what was going to go on in this jail. I'd never been to jail, and I just was scared to death and all that stuff. So they take me in, and I give them all my possessions, my belt, my wallet, all that stuff, and then they took me into the drunk tank. And within minutes, I saw a guy stab another guy. I saw a bailiff beat that guy within an inch of his life. There were people just fighting constantly. It was just hell, man. It was terrible. And I'm sitting there till about 4 a.m. I haven't eaten. But this time it's been like almost 24 hours. I hadn't had a shower. I'm in the same clothes I was the day before. They called me over to take the mug shots, and that's when I started like realizing this is real. Like, I'm not getting out of this. I'm not going to talk my way out of this. People are going to know I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose Angela, the kids, all of it. My life is over.
Yeah.
And so they call me back to take pictures, and they send me in their room, and to send me over the counter to get Crocs and like scrubs and all that stuff, and take the rest of my clothes, put them in a bag, and give them to them, and put on the stuff you can have in the real jail. And I line up to get in this line to go to the cell block, and all I'm doing is just like, I'm so exhausted, and I'm just like, Lord, I didn't even have a relationship with God, but I was like, please let me be in a jail cell by myself. I don't want to have to watch, keep an eye open and make sure somebody's not going to try to harm me or something. And so we go down this line, and we wind up in this cell block, and I'm the last cell, and it was just me. And I was standing there, and then the bailiff said, back up. And so the door opened really slowly, and they told us to step in and turn and look at them and back up. So I've got like everything I can have in the world, 2 blankets, a toothbrush, a roll of toilet paper, that's it. And I watched that door just slowly, boom. And that lock hit. When I heard that lock hit, I was like, that's it, man. Like, my life's over. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I can't go anywhere if I want to. I can't eat if I want to. Like, if I want to go to the bathroom, it's in front of God and everybody, like, because there's just a little toilet here. It's an 8x8 cell. I didn't realize I was claustrophobic until that moment. And so I turn around, I look at this nasty bunk beds, and the mattresses were disgusting. And I just took one of the blankets, thank goodness I had 2, and I threw it down over the mattress. And I laid down face first. And I pulled the other blanket over me and passed out. By the grace of God, I passed out. And next morning I woke up, or a couple hours later I woke up, and I was in that same position. And with my head under the covers, and I thought, oh man, this was a nightmare. Thank you. I'll change my life. I'll stop. And I sat up, and my head hit the bottom of a steel bunk bed, and I knew that I was in jail. And I went, no, 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 no. I threw my legs over the side of the bed, and the cinder block wall was about this close. I felt the place closing in on me. I started to shake like I did in the restroom at my house. Just no, 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 no. This is it. This is it. This is it. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my house, my car, my kids, my wife, the money, my reputation, all of it. And that's probably how I put it in that order of importance to me at that time. And I thought, no, 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 no. And then I thought, well, I'll just take my life. I'll just kill myself in here. And then I won't have to deal with it. I'm very ashamed to say that, but that was the truth. That's where you get when you're so lost and you're so broken and you've hit the bottom, you think there's no way out. And so you look to take the easy way out, and thank God there was nothing for me to be able to harm myself within there to take my life. But I was sitting there thinking about that, and I started shaking, and all of a sudden this strange feeling came over me. Josh, it's hard to explain. Even this day, I get goosebumps even talking about it. And I was sitting there rocking back and forth going, no, 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 no. And then all of a sudden from inside my own being, inside my own gut, and from my own voice, I heard, at least now I don't have to lie anymore. At least now everybody will know who I am. And it was like the weight of the world fell off of me.
Yeah.
And I just started going, how did I get here? Like, how did I get here? And it wasn't long before Jesus showed up, and it wasn't some apparition. I didn't see him walking. He didn't look like Jonathan Rumi. I mean, it wasn't like, I just was there, and I had this feeling of like, God is here. And I quickly, he started showing me this all happened the day you walked away from me, when you walked away from that Baptist church you used to go to and away from your faith. And when you never took the Catholic faith seriously, and you basically decided you were going to live your life on your own and do everything on your own. So I wind up just starting to cry, because I realized everything that I've said to God when my mother died, and how I said I hated him, and how many times I'd cussed him since then. And I just hit my knees in that jail cell, and I said, Lord, I'm so sorry. Please, please, please forgive me. I want another chance. If you'll just give me another chance to be the husband and father that I always should have been. I promise you, I'll give up all this stuff. I'll be the man I should have been. I don't even know how to pray anymore. I don't even know if this is what you do. I don't have a relationship with you anymore, and I'm so sorry, like, for everything. And all I want is you back in my life. And you know, and if you won't allow me to be the husband and father I was called to be, if you're not going to allow me another chance with Angela, then please give her someone that will be the person she's always should have had. And so I'm praying and I'm crying, and people are yelling at me and all this stuff in the jail. And I get up and I sit there and I'm still praying and crying. And the bailiff shows up and says, "Hey, look, you can have a phone call." So I go out, I go to call somebody on this prison phone that nobody tells you how to operate. It has no headset. It just has a speaker in it. It's like the hardest thing in the world. And luckily some inmate handed me an empty toilet paper roll I could put to the phone speaker so I could hear. And then he told me how to dial out. And so I dialed everybody I knew, all those brothers for life I'd spent thousands of dollars on in college, my fraternity brothers, and nobody answered the phone. Called family, nobody answered the phone. Called recent friends, nobody answered the phone. And finally, my sister did at my dad's. And she said, "Look, we know where you are. Angel's across the street at the jail, or at the bonds agency. She's trying to bail you out," which I didn't think was going to happen because my wife's Irish and Italian, and she means what she says. And I was just like, "All right, well, what am I supposed to do?" She said, "Well, it'll probably be 9:00 tonight. It was Good Friday." She goes, "When you get out, I will come and get you. Angela's not going to let you come home other than to get clothes. She's not going to be there. She's going to take the kids to her parents' house. And then, you know, I'll take you to the house to get clothes, and then we'll take you down to Dad's farm 2 hours away, and you'll have to spend Easter down here. You'll have a court date on Monday, and then we'll have to figure things out from there." And so I said, "Okay." And I went back to the cell and I prayed. I prayed for a while. And the Lord started showing me all the mission trips and the vacation Bible schools and the people I'd helped bring to him. And he's like, "This is when you had joy. This is when you were happy. This is when this was the best time of your life. You've always thought that in your heart, and you can have that again if you'll just give your life to me." And so I get up, I tell him I'm going to give him my life. I give my life back to him there. I'm like, "Lord, you can have it. I mean, look at what I've done with it. I've destroyed it. You can have my life. I'll do whatever you want." Well, right after that, the bailiff shows up and says, "You got 2 visitors." So I go down to the room, and it's the Law and Order scene with the glass and the payphones, and it's my wife and my mother-in-law, and they're crying, and I'm crying. And I started to explain myself, and Angela said, "Wait, like, no, And I thought, this is it. She's going to tell me I'm done with you. I'm divorcing you, and that's it. And she said, "John, I'm not going to divorce you, and it has nothing to do with you, but everything to do with the vows I made to God in the church that day." She goes, "You can't come home other than to get clothes. I'm going to Mom and Dad's with the kids. You're going to go to your dad's. Your sister's going to come get you. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how we're ever going to fix this, but I'm not going to divorce you." And you know, and so she got up and left. And she's the angel of my life. I've told this story 1,000 times, and I'm not the hero of the story. There's 2 heroes, and I'm not one of them, Jesus and my wife. And so I go back to the cell. I sit there praying until about 9:00. I come out, I get my stuff, and I go outside I realized my work had found out there was a magazine in Memphis called Just Busted. And apparently yours truly made the cover. So people at work found out about it, and they couldn't wait to tell everybody, the #1 salesman in the country. And, you know, people were jealous of the success I'd had, and ran to tell everybody and make sure there was a big fall. So I'm looking at that. My boss had called 15 times on my phone. I was like, he knows. And so I look up when I get outside, and it's not my sister, it's my father. And I thought, oh man, oh man, oh man. Because my dad was very punishing. He was very no nonsense. He was very, I mean, there was a lot of discipline, spank, and all that stuff. And my dad didn't put up with mess. And so even though he was almost 80 and overweight and 6 foot, and I was 275 and 6'8" and 37 years old, I felt like a little kid that had broken something in the house, and I was about to pay for it. And so I start walking towards him, and he comes off the back of that car, and he's just walking right at me with his fist clenched. And I was like, "You know what? You deserve it. Just sit here and take whatever he's going to dish out." And he grabbed me by the shirt, and I turned my face, just take it like a man, you know, just, and next thing you know, he pulled me towards him, and he said, "Son, I love you." It was the first time in my life I ever remember my father telling me he loved me. We got in the car, we went to my house, we got clothes, we got in his car. And he drove me back down to the farm. We talked about my mother, which we had never done after she died. Very emotional time. He asked me if it was his fault, if all this was his mistake, if he wasn't a good father. And I told him, "No, Dad, you weren't always the dad I wanted, but like you still wear a cape in my eyes. I mean, I'm a grown man. I made my own decisions." So long story short, man, I got down there. And I spent Holy Saturday. This was Good Friday when I got down to my dad's. Holy Saturday was, I spent it like the church does in quiet, confusion and just silence. And got up Sunday morning. I had a inkling to go to mass for the first time in my life. And there was a little Catholic room in this little small country town in Mississippi that Angela had been to once 5 years before. She said, if we're going to go to your dad's for Christmas, then we've got to go to mass. So I knew they had this little church there. I looked it up online. They had an Easter mass at 11 o'clock. So I borrowed dad's truck or car. I went down there, pulled up. Nobody was there. And I was like, you got to be kidding me, God. Like the one time I want to go to mass on my own in my life and nobody's here. So I'm sitting there like beating the steering wheel and flipping out, crying. And next thing you know, this Jeep pulls up and the sister gets out. And I'd seen her before. The one time we'd been there, she'd been with this priest and she was helping him out and stuff. So she looks at me and is like, what are you doing? And I said, I just wanted to go to mass. She probably thought I was nuts, and she's like, it's down the road. There's too many people. It's Easter. You know where this 4-H building is? I said, yes, ma'am. We had family reunions there. So I get in the car, drive down there. Next thing you know, I go in, there's families everywhere, which is really hard because I missed mine. Well, in walks this priest that I'd seen in that Catholic room, 5 years before. That he traveled like 4 or 5 towns and rotated between all these little parishes. But we had never spoken like that. I'd just gone to that mass and walked out. Well, now I'm at this mass, and he gives this beautiful Easter homily in Spanish and English. And I get up to leave because they're having a potluck. And I was like, dude, I don't want to be around families. And I get to the door, I grab the door handle, and all of a sudden the devil, I feel his hand hits my shoulder. Excuse me, I said the devil, but that's not right. This hand hits my shoulder, and it's this priest. And I turn around and I'm like, hey man, and he goes, hello, John. He somehow knew my name. I never once told that guy my name. And he goes, I don't know where your family is and why they're not with you, but God wants me to tell you that everything's going to be all right. And he turned around, he looked at me, he said, it's good to see you again, John. I hope to see you again soon. And he walked into the crowd and disappeared. I was like, what just happened? How did he know my name? How did he even know about my family? How did he?
Yeah.
And so I get in the car and I'm like, what the heck, God? And next thing you know, I just said, well, I guess you're going to give me a chance. So the next morning, my dad drove me back to Memphis. I went to court. There was a Catholic judge here that had started a drug court. So I went to that and I pled guilty and got on diversion where I had to go take drug tests every month and parole hearings. And then it was off my record after a year. But I went and did all that morning. I had to go to work because they found out and they'd flown in all these big wigs because the number one sales guy in the country had gotten in trouble. And so my dad walked me into a building where he also worked for 45 years and, walked me in there. And they were asking me all these questions. Did you ever do it at work? Did you do this? Did you do that? And I was going, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then I realized I hadn't talked to my wife since Friday. And when she was in the window of the jail, the visitation thing. And I said, you know what? Yeah. I'm leaving. And they said, what do you mean you're leaving? I said, I'm leaving. They said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to rehab. And they said, is that court ordered? I said, no, I'm going to do it. I need to make sure that I need to know where I am in all this because I need to get my wife and family are the most important thing to me right now. They're like, well, you could lose your job if you leave. And I go, you know what? I made you all a lot of money. I made a lot of money with you. If you want to fire me, there's nothing I can do about it. But I can get another job. I can't get another family. And so I got up to leave, and my dad took me down to this place I used to see commercials for on TV when I was a kid. Thought, I'll never be there, and here I am. And they walked me in, and, man, these families are just throwing kids that are addicted to stuff and young men and women in this room and just like, here, take them. They're scratching themselves and bleeding because they're all methed out and stuff and just thinking there's bugs on them and stuff. And, like, there's just these families, like, take them. They stole the car. They stole my ATM card. They set something on fire. Like, it just was crazy. And so I picked up this newspaper and I was blocking myself where I couldn't see anybody, but they were coming in through a door over my right shoulder. Well, also the door opened, the paper didn't move, didn't billow, didn't move. Nobody walked by. And I looked up and it was my wife. And I was like, Angel, what are you doing here? How'd you know I was here? And she said, John, I'm mad as hell at you right now, but I can't let you go through this alone. I can't let you go through this alone. And so I went in, I got assessed with her right by my side. They said, we believe in a 30-day outpatient program for you. She was not happy about that. She's like, can you put him under the place? Like, do you still have electric shock or anything? Like, make sure you get all the demons out of him. But I go outside and I'm feeling horrible because I thought my dad's going to have to drive 22 hours a day to bring me up here. I mean, 2 hours one way. So 4 hours a day to drive me up here every day for the next 30 days for rehab. I was off work until after that. And so I'm looking around, he's nowhere to be found. And my wife's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for my dad. And she goes, I'm not going to make him do that. You're coming home. Allison, my 3-year-old daughter, had asked if I was dead. It'd been that long since she'd seen me. And she goes, you need to come home. So I do. I go home. My kids are there. We had like hours of just holding each other, I didn't want to let them go. But it was time to go to bed. I go back to the bedroom, and Angela's not there. She's in Jacob's bed across the hall. She said, look, I can't be around you like that. I don't know when we're going to heal. I don't know how to heal, but like, I can't be around you. So I'm laying in the bed, and I'm sitting there, and I start to feel the air conditioning, the TV, the food, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm king of the castle again, right? This is back in my house, and started getting cocky. And I looked over, and I saw she went in the bed next to me. And I thought, what are you smiling at, you idiot? Like, nothing's better. And maybe you're able to quit drinking. Maybe you're able to quit doing drugs, but that doesn't make you a better person. So I went to open the bedside table, looking for a Bible, because I felt like I wanted to be close to Christ again, like I was in the jail cell. And for a former Protestant who never really was a practicing Catholic, it was scriptures for me. Yeah. So there wasn't a Bible in there. There was Father Larry Richard's book, Be a Man. And I read it from cover to cover that night. Woke up at 5 in the morning. I finished it and got up at 5 in the morning, 5:45 in the morning. And Angela woke up, said, what are you doing up so late or so early? I said, I never went to sleep. I've been reading this book. I need to be a better man. And this book's showing me how to do it. From that day forward, Josh, I read like 40 or 50 Catholic books in my first year. I started going to Mass. Wow. I walked into Mass one day to hide from the world. And this priest, Father James Martell, please pray for him. He's got cancer right now. But
absolutely.
But he took me under his wing, and he took me to confession. He wouldn't let me beat up on myself. And after confession, he walked out with me and said, you're going to come to daily Mass every day. You're going to lecture. I'm going to teach you how to do that right now. And you're going to come to confession every Friday until I tell you any different. Saved my life. Became one of my best friends. He's like a grandfather to my kids. He's over here before he was sick, he was over here all the time. And, he's getting better. He's on chemo now, but he saved my life. And so a year later, I haven't told anybody what's going on in my life, and we're coming to the end of this. So people are kind of spent this much time listening to it, but I'd started praying. I was leading my family to Mass. I'd become the spiritual leader of my family, and Angela and I began to start healing a little bit. And so I go to the men's conference, same conference I went to when I confessed and got arrested, shortly after. And Father Mike Schmitz was speaking, very young, relatively unknown priest at the time. And that evening we had a fundraiser at my parish, and there was another guy that had been at the conference. I'd seen him there, and he was running around this basketball 3-point shootout thing, telling everybody his sins. It was the first time he'd been to confession in like 16 years. And some of these sins he did not need to be saying in a room full of children and women. So I grabbed him. I was like, hey, man, you got to calm down. Like, you can't say that stuff in here, and everybody can hear you. And he's like, man, I don't know why I feel this way. And I said, well, you said you've been to confession for the first time in 16 years. You've had a moment with the Holy Spirit. He goes, I'm cradle Catholic. I know God. I know Jesus. I don't know anything about the Holy Spirit. So I start to tell him, and I feel the devil hit me in the back of the head. He's like, what are you doing? You're a coke addict. You're a loser. You're a scumbag. You're going to tell somebody about Jesus? Really, you hypocrite? So I stopped and I said, Jay, you should talk to the two priests. Like, they're here. They're busy tonight, but they could set up time to talk with you next week. Well, he was a salesman, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. He badgered me until I said I'd meet him Tuesday night for pizza. So I get up the next morning, go to Mass. I come home. I sit down with my Bible, and I said, Lord, what am I going to do with this guy? Like, if I'm going to do anything, you have to do it. So next thing you know, an hour later, I had 8 pages written over the Ruah, over the water, through Genesis to Pentecost and beyond about the Holy Spirit. So I met him Tuesday night. We sat down. We started to, I looked like a lawyer. I had books everywhere. I was like, all right, sit. And I started telling him about the Holy Spirit. And dude, he's just sitting there listening, and we get done, and he goes, man, that's amazing. You should start a men's group. And I said, man, nope, not your guy, man. Not your guy. Like I said, I hadn't told anybody what had happened in my life. And he goes, man, why do you always do that? Why do you always dodge me? It took me forever to get you to come do this. Now you could really help people, and you're saying no. And I said, I finally felt convicted by the Holy Spirit. And I said, Jay, I was arrested on a felony charge of possession of cocaine last year. I'm not your guy. And I thought he was going to go, all right, check, please. Like, that's in the conversation. But instead he goes, wow, that's amazing. You should start a men's group. And I was like, dude, are you on drugs? Maybe we should drug test you. Did you hear what I said? And he goes, we're all broken, man. Like, all of us are broken. And in our parish, We have a men's club. We drink beer and raise money. That's all for kids. That's all we do there. The Knights of Columbus is not very strong in our parish. We have nothing
Mm-hmm.
spiritual for men, and you could really
Yeah.
help with that. So he convinced me, and a week later, we called 30 guys into a room. We told what had happened. Other was, actually, we didn't tell anybody. We just told them to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Some he knew, some I knew.
Yeah.
And I walk into that room that night, and the devil tried to do it again. I reached for the door,
Mm-hmm.
and the devil's like, if you open that door and tell these guys, you're going to lose everything. They're going to kick your kids out of campus. They're going to, out of school. They're going to make you leave this parish. Your wife's going to be embarrassed. And so I turned and started to walk away, and the Lord showed up and said, John, you told me when you walked out of that jail cell you'd be different. Turn around and open the door. So I opened the door, and all these guys were like, what are we doing here, man? And where's the beer? And and all that. And so I said, guys, we got a great men's club. We raise money and do all that stuff, and we have a good time, but we never talk about Jesus. I said, let me tell you what can happen in your life when that's the case. And I went blah, and I ugly cried, snot cried, scared to death, told them everything I've told you and more.
Yeah.
And their eyes were getting bigger and bigger, and I'm worried they're going to leave. And so I finally got through, and I said, look, I can't be the only one who's broken. I can't be the only one who struggles. I can't be the only one who needs relationship and a place to be with other men who want to be more like Christ. And I said, this isn't entrapment. If you want to go, go. You didn't know why you were called here. I get it if you want to leave, but if you want to stay and you want to start something, then stay with me and let's figure it out. Father says I can. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'll try. So I sat down, and the guy that asked me to do it stood up, and he was crying, and he said, I care more about money and my job than I do my wife and kids by the way I spend my time. And he sat down, and the next guy stood up, and he goes, all y'all make fun of me and my family for being so overly Catholic, and we're this great Catholic family. My wife moved out 3 weeks ago. I've been addicted to porn for 5 years, and she's had enough, and I just got papers in the mail today. She wants a divorce, and she's not coming home. The next guy stood up. He said, we've got 9 kids. Y'all know that we fight. When we fight, I escape. My wife thinks I'm at work. Work thinks I'm at home and sick. And I've been in a hotel room in downtown Memphis. I've had a case of beer, and I Ubered up here because I thought all we ever do up here is drink as men. So I was tired of drinking alone. Josh, every man in that room stood up that night like pistons in an engine, just up, down, up, down, up, down, just telling people what was wrong in their life. And that was the night that this ministry was born. That was the night that I started to find the power of vulnerability in a man's life. Because Josh, and we'll wrap this part up. So I know you probably got questions and, want to interject some things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I know that so many men have been raised that what it means to be a man is to work hard, to never complain, to never have feelings, never have emotion, to be a one-man army, to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But Jesus Christ never once said in the Gospels or anywhere else in the Bible that he wrote to pull yourself out of your bootstraps, right? To do it by yourself. In fact, he sent the disciples out 2 by 2. Right. Because he knew there was always a chance for one to struggle and there'd be another one to pick them up. That night I saw men become vulnerable, and it wasn't weakness like the world tells you it is. It was strength. And it called to mind the verse 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, where St. Paul has got a thorn in his side, a spiritual thorn. And he says he begged the Lord to remove it 3 times. And God says, no, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so St. Paul goes on to say, if I'm to boast, let me boast of my weaknesses, my insults, my burdens, and my difficulties, so that Christ can live in me. And then he says right after that, let me boast of all those things, because when I'm weak, I'm strong. And I started to realize that night, as those men did too, that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the strongest thing you could do is to admit that you're not perfect, that you need help, and to submit yourself in humility before the Lord. That's what he waits for in all of our life. And he waits for us to take our hands off the wheel and quit trying to control the steering wheel of our life and let him have it. And so that night, our men's group was born in our parish. That was 8 years ago. We've been meeting every Wednesday night since. I started to speak. A deacon with a Catholic Cafe radio show on EWTN lives in Memphis. He asked me to start a podcast. We've now been listened to in over 120 countries around the world. It's been downloaded over 500,000 times. And we've started men's groups all over the country, man, and that's what we're doing. But we found out that night that we could give other people freedom, that we could use my story and use the stories of other men to go into to talk about identity and your struggles and believe in who you are as a beloved son or daughter of God. And so we give missions on all that stuff. We launch these men's groups, and we help parishes build places for men where they can be the spiritual leaders they're called to be.
Yeah. Wow.
Thanks for listening to all that, man. I know it's a lot.
No, it's funny because I even said, like, I may interject and stuff, but I just found myself just so, like, at the edge of my seat, kind of like so intrigued in and I've heard it before. This is my second time. It's just
Yeah.
such a powerful testimony. It's like, yeah, thanks for sharing all that with us. I love that like what you said about like the devil in your ear, because I feel like most of the time we think of like when the devil's in our ear, he's just like this savvy and like just like real strong like creature that's like don't you dare, like you, who are you to do this, whatever. You
Yeah.
think he's like got this power over you kind of thing, and like crap, yeah, like I am not the right person for this and everything. But I heard someone one time actually compare it more so to like Courage the Cowardly Dog, like the cartoon I woke
Yeah.
or watched growing up. Of like he's actually sitting there in no kind of like that men's group, like small group that you were about to start, and I don't know, maybe turn into something someday. But really, he knows what it's going to do and the power it's going to have. So he's actually there, just like, oh, hold on, what? Well, hold on, don't. Maybe you're not the right person. Like, don't do this. And he's trying to do everything he can at that point to just stop it.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, whether it's just distracting you or making you feel unworthy. And I kind of felt like that in my own story of just kind of, it was typically kind of that same kind of college experience of is just looking for that next, it was just like a next girl to brag about to my
Yeah.
friends. Like, you guys won't believe who, whatever. And it was just that I ended up giving myself, and I've never even thought about like this until you mentioned it, like unholy vows of, okay, well, I won't sleep with a girl unless we have the intention on being married.
Sure.
Because then it's not, then at least my intentions are pure. But I was just giving myself excuses and just unholy vows. And I feel like the devil loves that, because he loves like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, as long as the intention's good, you're fine. But he knows like I can, whatever I can do to drag you down, like I'm going to do. So,
Yeah.
give you as much misinformation as I can.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, you're 100% right. And he's been doing it since the garden, man. I mean, if you look at the
yeah.
fall, all that is his willingness, or his not willingness, but his attempt to break apart the identity
Hmm.
of God and Adam and Eve. Like, you can see where he
Yeah.
shows up and he says to Eve, like, why don't you eat that fruit? And she goes, well, we
Hmm.
can't eat that fruit. We'll die. And what does he say? You won't die. So what does he do
Yeah.
immediately there? He calls God a liar, right? You
Yeah.
won't die. You'll know the difference between good and evil, and you'll be like God. You'll be like him, and he doesn't want you to be like him. That's basically what he's inferring. He's not the
Hmm.
good father that he says he is, right? Like,
Yeah.
if he was good, why who would give you everything but one thing? That's not
Hmm.
good. Why would they withhold something from you? He's not who he says you are, and he doesn't love you like he says he does, or he'd give you that.
Yeah.
So immediately you can see the devil spinning these lies,
Yeah.
right? And so what does she do? Well, it looked good to the eyes, it looked good to eat, and looked good to make one wise. So she bites the apple, sin and death come into the world. And then what happens?
Hmm.
God shows up. He's heartbroken over this development. He
Hmm.
removes us from the garden, not because he's an angry, judgmental father. Like, a lot of people can look at that and go, see, and the
Hmm.
devil will do that too. Look, he kicked you out of paradise. No,
Yeah.
it said there was not just a tree of life and of good and evil. He said, God says, let us remove them from the garden. So he's talking to the Trinity, lest
Hmm.
they eat from the tree of life and death. So guess what would have happened? We were already
Hmm.
in sin. You bite,
Hmm.
you eat from the tree of life and death, and you're forever in sin.
Yeah.
Right. So he removes us and he puts an angel there to guard it. The devil can
Yeah.
even use that to say, look, he's not a good
Hmm.
father. He kicked you out of paradise. No, he's a loving father. We're the ones that turn
Yeah.
from him. And so he does that same thing in our life. Yeah. Don't start that men's group. Don't start that nary cast. Don't do that. Like, dude, you're not so and so. You're not like
Hmm.
Christophanic. You're not this. You're not. I mean, he does it to all of us. And you're
Yeah.
right. It's because he knows how dangerous we are. He knows
Yeah.
that God gave us gifts and he made us for a purpose and for a reason.
Yeah.
And you exist now for a purpose that only you can fulfill. Like, yeah, we all
Yeah.
share the gifts and we have, a similar smorgasbord of gifts, but like,
Yeah.
there's something that you're meant to do. Maybe it's a certain amount of people that you're supposed to bring to Christ in your life that only you can do
Yeah.
because of the influence and the relationship you have, or maybe
Hmm.
it's the gifts that you've given to do like what I'm doing and other people are doing to be
Hmm.
on, in these parishes building things. We all have
Hmm.
different gifts, and as we talked about in the
Yeah.
beginning, you don't want to the beginning, you don't want to talk about comparison of who's doing what or what's more important or what's not. It's not
Yeah.
about that. It's what is God asking me to do? And the devil is always going to get in that way. And that's why you have to realize
Yeah.
that voice, that
Yeah.
negativity you see and you hear in your head all the time is not you.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's not you. It's the devil going, yeah, you can't, you shouldn't, you won't, you never will be. You're not as good as.
Hmm.
Whenever you hear that, that's the devil's voice. God doesn't speak to
Yeah.
you like that. God says things
Yeah.
like, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were
Yeah.
born, I set you apart.
Yeah.
Fear not, I've redeemed you. I've called you by name and you are mine.
Yeah.
That's how God talks. So you have to
Yeah.
distinguish the voices. You have yours, You have the devils and you have gods, and the ones that use the loudest and you hear most of the time is the devils. That's why
Yeah.
some days you feel like you've been in a conversation with people all day long and you've never said a word to anybody. You feel
Yeah.
beat up. You feel not good
Mm-hmm.
enough. Is because you've sat there and listened to him all day long.
Yeah.
And that's his
Yeah,
whole point,
absolutely.
is to keep you from doing the things that he knows that can be
Yeah.
helpful to the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. And once he gets those faithful people, if I can't stop them or if I can't make them do bad, then I'll at least just distract them, or I'll try to get them to not
Yeah.
do something. If I can get them to do nothing, then I've succeeded.
And even with good things,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
you become the person that's like, oh man, they're Catholic and they'll do a lot of things. Then you get asked to do a lot of things, right? Whether it's in your
hmm
parish and now you're running every event and da 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 da. And
yeah,
it's like, no, but I'm doing all this good stuff. Angela told me that in the beginning when
hmm
people started asking me to speak and do all this stuff. She was
hmm
like, well, John, like you're gone all the time. And I said, well, yeah, but I'm doing good things. She's like, okay, well, you're losing your family too. Like
hmm
this is your primary vocation.
yeah,
And so even in good things, the devil can make you so busy that you leave the things you really need to be focused on behind. So that's something else you got to watch for too.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know I talked about last week with the missionary. We talked about just the power of testimony, and how when building your testimony to share your story with people, it's like it's almost like an examination of conscience. You're doing like an examination of your testimony. It's like looking back to see like where was God at, and how was He moving in my story. Because probably looking back, like probably took some time of like looking back to see like, oh, like God was exposing these gifts and these talents He gave me to evangelize, and at a very young age. But I just like got to a time where I like was ignoring them, and it wasn't until later when now you have this podcast and stuff where it seems like he kind of, well, with the men's group when you started that up, like where he like, it was kind of like you realizing like, oh yeah, like this God gave me these gifts, and it's something that like He wants me to do. And it's kind of cool to look back and see, like, 'cause
Yeah.
I could see it in your story of like he showed you those gifts super early, and obviously just being human, we had those all the roller coaster. But then
Yeah.
it's also cool to see it in your wife too, because of the very very little part of like kind of what she was thinking and stuff. It's just overall cool to see that, for a fact God was talking to her big time too, of like, hey, hold on just a second, don't leave him. I know you're thinking, like, I know what you're
Yeah.
thinking, but stay with me, like I'm working on him. Like I can just imagine. I don't know if that, I'm like, I'm
No,
throwing words into the story, but that's what
yeah.
it seems like.
No, she
Like
was. I
that's
mean, she was always talking to him, and she'd had a
yeah.
rough life before me. She'd been hit by a car in college. I
Mm,
remember when that happened. She was walking across the street and was hit by a car and spent like 6 months in
mm,
the med. They spider webbed her
wow.
skull. Like said she'd never have,
Dang.
kids and wouldn't have proper brain function. And she just graduated with her master's like 4 months
Wow.
ago. We've
That's
got three
awesome.
beautiful children. Like she's a complete walking miracle. And she's the better
Mm,
Catholic between the two of us. Yeah, I do all this stuff, but
mm-hmm,
if you nuts and bolts, she's a better Catholic. And
mm,
and it wasn't easy for her. She had her own healing journey to go through. Cursillo and
yeah.
things like that helped her.
Mm,
It was a while. That's what I tell people that are addicts. They're like, well, when are they going to give me a break? And it's like, well,
mm-hmm,
you spent a lot of your life, training and teaching them the person you were, and now you're expecting them to see a different person overnight. It's not going to
yeah.
happen. And you really
Yeah.
have to focus on what God's asking you to do and let Him handle them. And that's what happened
Yeah.
with Angela and stuff. So yeah,
Mm,
I mean, it really is. And what you said about gifts and stuff, so many people go, well, I don't have gifts. Like, first of all, most people don't even know what gifts they do or don't have.
mhm.
Like, you need to
Yeah.
spend time with St. Paul looking at the gifts and then going,
Yeah.
okay, well, what am I naturally good at in my life? Right. Like for me,
Mm-hmm.
I was reading the gifts and I was like, okay, prophecy. Well, I can't tell you it's going to rain tomorrow, but that's not all like what prophecy is.
Yeah.
Prophecy is also like taking the word of God and interpreting it in a way where people can understand it and find it relatable and it changes their life.
Yeah.
I knew I
Yeah.
could do that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I look at like, well, I was a successful salesman. Well, I was a successful guy in my job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was relatable. I loved people. I was empathetic. Like I wanted to help people, even though I was a selfish jerk outside of work. Like I
Mm-hmm.
generally wanted to help people. So I looked at
Yeah.
that and I thought, man, the gifts God gave me that made me so good at this, that made me amass money and all this stuff and prestige and plaque after plaque. He didn't give me that just for that. He gave it to me to bring people to him. And so
Yeah.
you can do that. But I mean, one of the things that I had to really realize along the way was, I mean, I still feel like I'm going to throw up when I get up in front of people. Like I do. And even
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when I do this podcast, I
Yeah.
get really nervous and really,
Yeah.
and I just pray and I'm like, Lord, let them see you and not me. Let them hear you and not me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say like,
Yeah.
Jesus, I surrender. And Jesus, I trust in you like 33 times.
Yeah.
And then I just trust in what Jesus says. Like, do not worry about what you're to say. And I've found that more than anything. I have no seminary training. I don't have
Hmm.
any theological background. I don't have degrees. I've read a lot of
Hmm.
books, and I've just
Yeah.
gotten to know Jesus. And I believe truly that what people see, anything they see good in me spiritually or ministerially,
Hmm.
is Christ working through me, is the power of the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit. And what that takes is just a yes. And that's, look at
Hmm.
what he did with 12 men who were the people that nobody else would have picked. And the
Yeah.
important part was their yes. It wasn't their knowledge. It wasn't their way of
Hmm.
speaking beautifully. It wasn't any of that. It
Yeah.
was just their yes. And then he used that yes to transform them. You and I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for those men.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I was thinking about the gifts too, because I went through such a long phase of like, I felt like I knew what I was really good at, but I wasn't able to utilize it much. I had always had a very creative and entrepreneurial mind. I never got along with bosses because it was just like they wanted to do something one way, but I knew there was a better way to do it, and we just butted heads. And it was a pride thing a little bit, but I was like, how do like what is this entrepreneurial and the sales stuff like? What like I don't. I feel like it's actually something to use for God's kingdom. I just don't know how that is, and so I started my own business, knowing 10% of all the proceeds will always go back to my church, and all this stuff. We're supporting focus missionaries. We're hosting events for our parish at the business, but it's still so unfulfilling. And so
Yeah.
there's something I was like, it's still not it. And it was taking away from my vocation. I was spending less time at home, just kind of like what you were saying. But then all of a sudden, just out of the blue, the priest here at the university parish was like, would you be interested in this development director job? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'd talk to you about it. I honestly don't even know what that is. But he's like, well, you'd be doing fundraising. And I'm like, oh gosh, like I don't know the second thing about fundraising. And I was like, well, I'll interview for it. It doesn't matter because if I don't get it, I own my own business. So it's not that big a deal. But yeah, I interviewed for it and I got selected and I was like, well, I can do both. And so I did both for 8 months and it didn't go well because I was definitely putting work first. But it was wild because I thought I've got to quit one of them. And it wasn't until I went to confession and this Franciscan that didn't even know me at all was like, invited me to well, after I went through all my sins, he was like, let's dive deeper into them. And as we talked, he was like, I want to invite you. I don't know you and I don't know anything about you or this business or anything, but I want to invite you for your penance, do 10 Hail Marys and ask God, like talk to him who does know it, of like, is he asking you to part ways with your business? And I never felt so at peace after that penance and just text my wife because I was out of town and at a conference and was like, I think we need to sell the business. I want to focus on doing this fundraising thing full time. And all of a sudden just getting into this role and everything was so natural. I mean, I didn't get trained at all. I just was thrown in an office and they said, go for it. And so I was just like calling people and meeting with people, telling them about how excited I was to be part of this ministry. And they were donating. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing, but it's working. And then starting to get a little bit of formal training. And all of a sudden, everything just started lining up. And I was like working for the church. I was serving God in this role. And it was just beautiful. It's a job where my kids come up all the time, having lunch with the college students and me. And it's just been such a blessing. But it's great. And I always encourage people to look into those. Like, what has God given you? What's those talents that God has given to you? No matter if you think they're any kind of religious or not. And then how can you fit it into God's mission? And that's where God's calling you.
Well, that's where you find purpose and joy, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can work a job and make, I mean, I know more people with tons of money that have given their whole life to business and to whatever else that are
Mm-hmm.
miserable, right?
Yeah.
When I was working at Napa after I won the Salesman of the Year the first time, there was a guy that was about 76 years old. He was a divisional
Mm-hmm.
operations manager, and he would travel to stores in his districts, from outside of Atlanta, and he'd basically look at the books and auditing things and all stuff. He was friends with my dad, and my dad
Mm-hmm.
had long since retired at 65, and this guy was like 74 or something, like
Mm-hmm.
still working. And we
Yeah.
had been on the awards trip together, when I won the award, and I walked in there, and he's like, John, so many people were talking about you could do whatever you want now. You could run
Mm-hmm.
divisions, you could do this. And he said, what do you think you'll do? And I said, I'm just going to stay here and be a sales guy. And he's like, but you have all these opportunities. And I said, yeah, but I can make as much money or more than anybody in that
Mm-hmm.
position. I don't
Yeah.
have 180 people working under me and all their problems and stuff. And
Yeah.
so I was telling him all that, and he got real quiet. And I thought I made him mad, like, because he
Mm-hmm.
got
Yeah.
quiet. I was like, you all right? And he looked up at me and had a little tear in his eye. And he goes, John, I'm 74 years old. I got more money than I'll ever be able to spend in my life. He
Mm-hmm.
said, and sometimes I'm on a plane flying all over the place in our division. He had like the southeast of the United States. And he said,
Mm.
And I'm sitting there and I'll close my eyes to take a nap and I'll start to try to think of my daughters, my two daughters, and try to remember, a memory with them. And I can't remember any of
Mm.
them. I don't
Yeah.
have any memories with them. And that's when I told myself, like, I never want that. And
Yeah.
and he was very regretful for his choice, and I think there's a lot of
Mhm.
men that spend their whole life working. That's why you see a lot of older men all of a sudden getting their faith, as they're like, oh man,
Yeah.
like I've wasted my life. And it's not wasted their life, but that's the way it feels. Like when you realize,
Yeah.
man, I wasn't there for my kids. I wasn't there for ball games. I wasn't. And even me in ministry, like I could
Mhm.
go somewhere all the time if I wanted to. I mean, we have people all the time going, hey, come here, do this, do that, do that. And I say no, like I won't come there unless you want to start a men's group, first of all. So that negates
Yeah.
a lot of the just come here and speak stuff. And then
Yeah.
two, like I promised Angela I'd only go twice a month. And I'm going on a Friday and back on a Saturday evening. And it's
Mhm.
because I want to be here for my children. I want to see the sports games. I want to be here
Yeah.
to watch movies with them. I want to, like,
Mhm.
whatever we're doing, right? I want
Yeah.
to have that with them. So
Yeah.
that's another important thing as you grow closer to Christ, that the things that were once important are not as important anymore. I mean, I make less
Yeah.
money than I've ever made in my life, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think to like maybe close it up with one last
Sure.
question. What would you say would be like some advice for someone maybe listening to this that's like, yeah, you know what, you're right. I've kind of felt this, and now I feel really called to like share my story more. Where do they start?
Well, I mean, first of all, you need to look down. You need to look at what God's done for you. Like, sit down and
Hmm.
look at the journey of your life. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people will say, well, I don't have a story like yours, John. I don't have, like, I had a
Hmm.
guy say that once when they were
Hmm.
talking to him about being a speaker at the local men's conference. He's like, I don't have some crazy cocaine story like Edwards over there. Like, I've had a normal life,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's like, dude, you don't have to. Like, God has done something in your life, or you wouldn't love him
Yeah.
the way you do. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be the biggest, like, okay, shoot off cannonballs and all this crazy stuff going on, right?
Hmm.
It's you look at what he's done for you. And this is what I tell people, like when they say, well, I try to evangelize to people and it never works. Like they get angry or I don't convert
Hmm.
people. And most of the time we're trying to argue people into the faith. We're trying to
Yeah.
use apologetics and all that stuff. But the most powerful thing you can ever do is tell people what Jesus did for you.
Yeah.
Why? Because people can argue with like facts about whether God exists or not, right? And where there's
Yeah.
something rather than nothing and all that stuff. But what they
Hmm.
can't argue with is somebody who's telling the story of their life and about what Christ has
Hmm.
done with them in a passionate way. Because
Yeah.
they can't argue with that. Like,
They can't
okay,
understand.
well, you're wrong. Well, how am I wrong? You weren't
Hmm.
there. I lived it. This is what happened. Like, they may think, okay, well, there's another way to explain some of those things. But when you tell your story and your love of God with passion, it's what moves people. It's why I think it's Pope Paul VI that said, if you're going to be a great teacher, first be a great witness,
Yeah.
right? Because it is the witness. I mean, I think that through me, the Lord has probably used more people to bring him back to him through my story, my witness, than he ever has
Hmm.
from a talk on David I've given or on identity
Yeah.
or any of those things, right? They all help. But the most impactful thing is the testimony, because it makes other people believe, man, look where he was. And if
Yeah.
God could do this with him, I mean, I was
Yeah.
sitting in a jail cell 8 years ago on the verge of taking my life. And now
Hmm.
I'm going to Hawaii in a few months to lead a men's conference and start groups in 3
That's so
parishes.
cool.
Like
Yeah.
I never would have thought that. But it
Yeah.
starts by sitting down and go, okay, like, let me look back at my life in the different phases as a kid, as a young adult, as a
Hmm.
young person get started in life. Where has God been? Where was he not? Why do I
Yeah.
love him? Why am I faith filled now? What has happened? And maybe there are some of those crazy moments where, you almost got a DUI one night and didn't, or, you
Hmm.
almost had an accident of some kind and didn't,
Yeah.
or maybe it's just, what, like there was just a day when I realized I needed the Lord in my life, right?
Yeah.
That my faith wasn't my own. I was still riding the coattails of my parents or something like that. And then one day it just
Hmm.
hit me. Whatever your story
Yeah.
is, figure it out. And then that's how you share people. You don't go like, hey, you should be Catholic and hit them in the head with the
Hmm.
catechism until they give in. But
Yeah.
like,
Hmm.
you just look, I've
Hmm.
brought a lot of people to Jesus by simply, first of all, being a friend first, like building a
Yeah.
relationship and not
Hmm.
starting it because there's some piece of meat that I want in my ministry group and some number that makes us look
Yeah.
better. But it's
Yeah.
somebody I know that's struggling in their life that needs God. And I don't go in there and go, let me tell you about Jesus and what he can do for you. Just there as
Yeah.
a friend. And then one day, what generally happens more often than not is, man, my life stinks right now. Like work's not going well. My relationship with my
Hmm.
wife is terrible. My kids and I are not getting along. Well, what are you doing about it? Oh, I know you're
Yeah.
the Jesus guy, and here it comes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've met with you, we've been hanging out for 8 months, and I've never once said anything about the men's group or Jesus or anything like that. Like, but dude, you sound like your life's in a bad place, and I do know something that can help you, and I'm glad to share that with you if you want. That's a very different conversation because I've earned the right in their life to be able to talk to them about that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. We skip that part. We just want to go out and hit people in the head with the Bible and say, love Jesus or go to hell. Like, and it's just, it doesn't work like that. So I would just say, write down, like, go through your life and look at your story. Where were your influences? Where did you first meet Jesus? How did you meet Jesus? When did your life really change for Jesus? And if it hasn't, then maybe he's still writing that story, and that moment hasn't come yet. But you look at that, you look at the lives of the saints, you look at people like St. Augustine and people like that. I mean, he was, give me chastity, but not now, Lord. Right. I mean, he was in his 40s when he really converted. So there's hope for all of us. And the place to start is with, where is my relationship with Christ? And there's many ways to grow that relationship: through prayer, through scripture, through the mass, through community with other people. Our church has many gifts in which you can do that. But that's the important thing, to have that relationship. That's what spurs you on. That's what helps you find your gifts. And then you can start building your testimony. You can go out and start telling people your story. And that's a lot easier than going to tell people about the Bible. You go tell people your story, and they're going to meet Jesus, and they're going to meet the faith through your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thanks, John, for being on.
Oh, man, it was
you're
great.
Awesome. And we'll skip the Saint draft this time.
Oh, man, I had some ready.
Are you ready?
Do you want to go? I just give you some right now. They're like my top five.
We can do it. I just want to make sure you didn't have something else you needed to get to.
Yeah, no, I'm all right. I've got a few minutes.
Let's do it. No, let's do it. I'm down for it then, because I do it each and every week, and I always challenge myself to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And so explain this to people that maybe haven't done this before. So it's the Saint draft. It is just like the NBA draft. And once someone's drafted, they're off the table, and we're going back, see who can kind of create the best starting five team. But it's kind of like the old, did you ever watch Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's like the points are made up and they don't matter. Kind of same thing. There's no wrong answer to this, but just a fun thing. But you guys comment below who you think had the better team. And the guest always goes first. You get the number one pick in the 2024 Saint draft.
St. John Paul II.
Oh, man, that's always my first. Awesome.
There's a couple that aren't saints yet that I'd like to have, like blessed, like Fulton Sheen and
so we typically go a sixth man that's not quite a saint yet.
Okay,
that's
cool.
Our kicker. Why John Paul II for number one?
He's just an inspiration, man. I mean, there's been very few people other than Christ himself and Paul that have really had the impact on the world that they've had. And I just think that his teachings right now are what the world need more than anything: the theology of the body. I mean, obviously I work with the JP2 Healing Center with Dr. Bob Schutz and Sister Miriam and all them. And so one of the first things I really studied when I came in, because Angela and I were struggling so much in our relationship, was love and responsibility, the theology of the body. And I think with all the gender confusion and all this just stuff, like the theology of the body, and John Paul II was always about being a gift. And our culture is so countercultural. It's all about you. Right. Yeah. So I think uniquely right now that his teachings and his work are made for a time such as this. So,
yeah, absolutely. That's great. All right. Well, I'll start my first pick and bend the rules just a little bit, because they kind of are paired together. But I feel like the family is so huge right now that we would need a saint. And this is always our team is trying to save the world today. And so St. Louis and Zelly Martin.
Yeah.
Just being great role models for how a mom and a dad should treat their kids. Obviously, they raised up a whole bunch of religious life as well. So they're obviously good at least encouraging them in their vocation, but just great teachers. My water bottle, I carry it around with me, always has them right there. So
awesome,
they're always watching over me. So I'd go, and if I had to pick one, if we weren't going to bend the rules, I'd definitely go Zelly Martin.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 2.
St. Paul.
Okay. That one's always a good one for people's list. He's very commonly picked.
Yeah, I mean, just because the guy, he didn't. I mean, here he is right here. I mean, it's my boy. He's a patron saint of our ministry. He awesome. Just, he went out. Like that's what I model this ministry after. Is Paul didn't? His eyes were open, and he went out and immediately started preaching truth and establishing community. And Paul calls us all. You see the very humanness of Paul. Like, I do not do the things I want to do. I do the evil I do not want. Like.
Yeah,
you can relate to Paul. I mean, Peter's another good one too. I mean, they're just they were everyday people that were able to do massively. I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for St. Paul. I mean, it just,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so I've always loved him. I loved his writings,
Yeah.
and just his own brokenness and vulnerability. And so
Mm-hmm.
I could not put him on my team.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's awesome. Well, I'd go with one then. That's from the Old Testament as well. Oh no, well both, but or new. Anyway,
Yeah. From the Bible.
Saint
Yeah.
John,
Yeah.
Saint John the Baptist.
Yeah.
So if
That's a
Jesus
good
wasn't going
one.
to call him the most righteous man, he's got to make the starting lineup.
Yep.
So
That's a good one.
he'd be great, and he's also sort of, not officially, I don't think, but sort of the patron saint of fundraisers in a
Mm-hmm.
way. St. Catherine Drexel is probably more so. I think she actually officially is, but um, St. John the Baptist, they always tell us as people in the fundraising world to think of him because he was like out in front. Like he went ahead and made the path straight for Jesus. And that's exactly what fundraisers do is they go out and they're like, we're fundraising money, but really it's for the future. Like we're trying to find mission partners for the future of this ministry. And so without fundraisers, the ministry wouldn't really exist without the patrons, the people who are donating to our podcast, who people are donating to
Yeah.
these ministries, like the ministries wouldn't exist. But St. John the Baptist is, great one. It's got to be in that starting five.
St. Augustine.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just because, I mean, very relatable to him with his story of struggles but also the teachings of the church. I mean, he has formed so much of the thought of the church, as a church father.
Yeah.
So he's one I think I couldn't leave off the list.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. My next one would probably be, I'm going to keep it in the family here with Zelly Martin. I'm going to go St. Therese of Lisieux.
Yeah. That's
I think it's awesome. I mean, just such a great, like, witness of faith. And she's, I love that, like, she's the great, like, a really great example of, like, she's obviously passionate about her vocation. I mean, she had to, like, get special permission to join at a younger age. But I love that there were two things I love. One was that she really didn't like one of the sisters in the covenant or the convent. And so she specifically felt God was calling her to not only pray for that woman, but be around her, like be with her, be present. And I thought that was super cool, even though she didn't like her. But then like when she died, like the sisters had a hard time writing a eulogy for her because they used to say like she didn't do much.
Yeah.
And so then later when they found her writings, they're like, holy moly, like and now a doctor of the church. So.
Yeah. Let's see. I got 3 or 4 more, but we only have 5. So,
that's where it gets tough.
Yeah. Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, her care for the poor, the fact that she didn't feel God's presence for 50 years and was still an incredible saint. There's a quote that she has that I use a lot in some of my talks where I'm talking about the importance of a relationship with Jesus. And she says to her sisters in the convent, I'm worried that many of you still don't know Jesus, really haven't met him one-to-one. You haven't allowed him to look into your soul and for him to tell you how much he loves you. And so I always think like, man, if she was saying that to women who had completely given their lives over to Christ, what does that say for us? Right. So, but she was just I mean, if you've ever seen pictures of her feet, they were gnarled and like just discombobulated. And like the fact that woman was just steadily just out helping other people. So Mother Teresa would be my third one, awesome. I guess. Yeah.
She's got one of my favorite quotes too. I love that. Like she lived in a time that we have actual video footage of her and this reporter, I think one time was talking to her and it's like, when you pray, what do you say? And she goes, I don't say anything. I just listen. I'm like, well, what does God say? She said, he doesn't say anything. He just listens. And I'm like, that just like to so many people would be like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't get it. I don't get it. But it's like, sometimes you just got to be in the presence and that's all you need. All right. My next one, I think I need to go my missionary with St. Francis Xavier. He was a patron saint of my Acts retreat one time. And when I was on team, and it was just great, like getting to know him and his amazing story, and definitely someone that was unapologetically Catholic and really went for it. But also had kind of a conversion story too, which was great. But he's definitely in starting 5 for me.
There you go. I would probably say, and gosh, there's so many good ones, man. Like St. John Chrysostom was another one I've been thinking about, but like St. John of the Cross, there's a bunch of St. Francis of Assisi, probably.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just I got a lot of good friends that are Franciscan friars, whether either of the Renewal, Father Malachi and Father Mark Mary, and some of those guys, Father Agostino, and then Father Pavanka Franciscan. I mean, I love the Franciscan order of life and the way of life, the rules,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
call to poverty and abandonment to God's will. Like I love that. So he would be my number 4. Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and yeah, you do kind of get to the point where it's like there's so many that can go in this last one. So I'd probably go the patron saint. We named him after, or named my son after him, Benedict, and so Saint Benedict,
Yeah.
and it's just good. I mean, especially him being an exorcist, so that'd probably be something we would need in today's day. I've
Yeah,
seen a lot of.
sure.
So I was watching Pints with Aquinas and just seeing like the exorcists he's had on the show and stuff, and it's just like, man, that stuff's real. It's real and it's needed right now. Like, but
Yeah.
he'd be a great asset to the team.
Yeah.
All right. So for the 6, man, it's a blessed or a venerable. Like they
But
can
this is the
fill that
5th,
6
right?
spot.
This is the 5th, right?
So no, that was 5.
Oh, that
So
was
you have
5.
JP
Okay. Yeah.
2, yeah,
Okay.
JP 2, St. Paul, Augustine, Mother Teresa, Francis of Assisi.
Okay. Gotcha.
So yeah, so it'd be that venerable or blessed. And
Yeah. That's a good one. Cause it's either between, Fulton Sheen or, Carlo Acutis. I'm not sure which
oh yeah,
one.
yeah.
I
Our
guess
minds are on the same one.
I guess I'm going to say for today's world, um, we need that witness of young people. So, I mean, even though I
Yeah,
loved Fulton Sheen, man, I would have to say
yeah,
Blessed Carlos Acutis.
yeah, yeah. He's great. That's one that I've just recently started learning more about, and I
Yeah.
love that he like actually appeared to his mother in a dream when it was like, I'm in heaven and full of joy, and God told me that there's gonna be a whole generation of saints to follow me, and I was like, well, that gives you a lot of hope. That like I
I
feel like that
was,
kind of hypes me up.
I,
Like,
I led a
yeah,
pilgrimage to Italy about a month and a half ago, and
uh,
I was at his body when Pope
yeah.
Francis announced they were going to canonize him.
Oh,
So yeah,
nice. That's
I was
so
outside
cool.
giving a talk, and I looked down at some notes on my phone, and
Yeah,
like a thing came up that said Pope Francis announced canonization of Blessed. So
that's
we
so
were
cool.
standing right there. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so awesome.
So that's my team, man. That's my squad.
Awesome. Well, my
Yeah.
last one would be I don't know if you've heard of this guy. Most people haven't, but it's the book Kevin Wells wrote. It's Priests and Beggars. But it's about Venerable Father Al,
Oh
Father
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Aloysius Schwartz. I love that guy, and he's just such another great example of just caring for the poor and all the stuff he did. I love his devotion to the poor, to the fact where he was like, I can't live in something super nice because I can't live like this and then serve the poor. So he like threw himself like kind of like Mother Teresa, just 100% headfirst into it. And just all the things he did with the boys' towns and girls' towns was just amazing. And
Yeah.
obviously they're still alive and well today, which is just great. So
Yeah. That's
yeah,
awesome, man. Two good
well, there's
teams.
the teams. Yeah, so you guys comment below which one you guys think. Obviously, there's no wrong answer. But yeah, John, again, thanks for being on. Like, it was great talking to you, and I was honored too because, like I said, that man is you. Like hearing your testimony the first time, I was just like blown away. And it wasn't until months later that I started the podcast. So like when I reached out, I was just like, he's probably too busy, but I'm going to reach out anyway. And so
No,
thank you
man.
for responding and being on.
Oh,
It's
dude,
been
you're
great.
welcome. I mean, I was in that position at once too, right? And guys like
Yeah,
Matt Frad and Stefanik and guys like that helped me. And so I
yeah,
love helping other people, man. We need a lot of people in the
yeah.
vineyard, a lot of laborers out there doing the Lord's work. So
Absolutely.
happy
And
to help with anything like that.
yeah, and that's absolutely how I felt with all the responses and getting to talk to Father Gregory Pine and get to talk to some of these people that haven't been on the show but have been so encouraging and so helpful. Of just like email me, I'm more than happy to answer questions, and even if they're not have the time yet, they're praying for it and their stuff. So
Yeah.
well, we will drop all the links for your social media and your YouTube channel,
Yeah.
everything below. So you guys make sure to go check out Just a Guy in the Pew, right?
Yep. Just a
Am I
guy
saying
in
it
the
right? Okay.
pew.com. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we will include it. And again, thanks so much. And everybody else, don't forget to like and subscribe. Help us get to that 1,000 mark. We're getting so close. Other than that, we will see you next week. And yeah, have a blessed week.
All right. Thank you.